into authentic conversations about ourselves and our community, exploring topics that uplift and inspire us, from personal growth to social change. So grab your teacup and get ready to join the conversation. Tea sippers. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, sippers. We are live sippers. Tanisha Talks Teas. We are back up on this Wednesday morning, 8:44. Diddy live verdict watch is in, y'all. Acquitted and convicted at the same damn time on 5 charges. Y'all, what do y'all think? Let's go ahead and give our introductions. We are live on YouTube. Hey, YouTube. We are live on Facebook. Sippers, Facebook. We are live on Twitch and Kick. Everybody, remember, when you come in, lift your teacups up to get filled up with this tea. And drop your teacups in the chat. Like and subscribe, y'all. Diddy verdict is in, y'all. Acquitted and convicted at the same damn time. Oh, my. What do they say, Diddy? What do they say, Diddy? Let's go ahead and get our screen share up so we can sip the tea of the things of whatever's going on with Diddy today. This morning, y'all, it just came across all news media. Okay. Poor Diddy appears to be acquitted and convicted at the same damn time. What is he acquitted on, y'all? And what is he convicted of? Let's listen in and see.
Goes on to say, Cassie has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry.
On more than one occasion, and all you have to prove is one incident of possession with intent to distribute. You have the personal assistant saying that they were asked also to bring narcotics to give it to Sean Combs so it can be delivered during the free calls. And even Brendan Paul even said that on
Not guilty of leading a criminal enterprise, not guilty of racketeering conspiracy. They will now move to the other four counts, 2 of them on sex trafficking and on and we have not guilty now on count 2, which was sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura. Sean Combs has been found not guilty of sex trafficking when it comes to his former
not guilty on the sex trafficking.
There was a real debate that the jury heard over the course of the last 2 months about
not guilty for Puppy,
and
y'all.
Coercion and the complications of deciding when an 11-year relationship between Combs and Cassie Ventura may have become a criminal one. And the jury decided
that it was not.
It was not criminal sex trafficking when Sean Combs committed what his attorneys freely admitted was domestic abuse, as you saw in that video. He has been found not guilty now on racketeering conspiracy, not guilty on sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. He has been found guilty on count 3, transportation for the persons, for the transportation for the
Go wipe your mouth, Ellie.
purposes of prostitution.
Guilty on
count
Combs
5,
will be
transportation
convicted
for the
on
purposes
the
of prostitution. These charges carry a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in prison, so we do have a split verdict. Sean Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of sex trafficking Cassandra Ventura, but he has been found guilty on 2 counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And we're waiting for one more count, the sex trafficking of Jane. And just now the jury has decided that Sean Combs is not guilty of sex trafficking. His former girlfriend, who testified under the pseudonym Jane. So the jury has now believed that the relationships that Sean Combs had with his former girlfriends, Cassie Ventura and a woman who testified under the pseudonym Jane, were not criminal, did not involve sex trafficking. All Sean Combs has been convicted of here is transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And Kira, those did seem to be the most evident crimes that Sean Combs committed. We heard testimony from the male escorts. The jury heard about the cash that they were paid, and as prosecutors told them, they were not in those hotel rooms for scintillating conversation. Sean Combs.
All right, y'all. Sean Diddy Combs acquitted of most serious counts, convicted on prostitution charges. Sean Diddy Combs was not found guilty of the most serious charges he faced. Sean Diddy Combs was acquitted of ex-trafficking and racketeering after a closely followed high-profile federal trial in New York City. He was convicted on 2 lesser prostitution charges, 2 of them, okay? The split verdict was read on Wednesday, July 2nd, today. He faces up to 10 years in prison after he was convicted on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Had Combs had been convicted on the charges of ex-trafficking and racketeering, he could have spent the rest of his life in prison. Instead, it's relatively good news for the music mogul. Oh, he's back to being a music mogul now, not the hip-hop disgrace music mogul, okay? Who has spent the past several months behind bars and whose public reputation has taken a massive hit in the wake of the charges. Combs' star-powered defense team successfully argued that prosecutors have failed to prove their serious charges. Over the course of the trial, which began in May, prosecutors called 34 witnesses over the course of 29 days of testimony. Among them was Cassandra Cassie Ventura, Combs' ex, with whom he was in a relationship for 11 years. Prosecutors sought to prove that she had been coerced into participating in freak-off king nights, which were elaborate ex-performances with male ex-workers. Okay, Ventura, who testified while 8.5 months pregnant, also delivering her baby during the trial, gave several days of testimony describing abuse and detailing the freak-offs. Combs' attorneys argued throughout the trial that the actual encounters have been consensual and introduced several exhibits, including text messages, into evidence intended to reinforce that argument. Though Combs was acquitted on the most serious counts, he still faces several dozen lawsuits accusing him of actual misconduct, meaning his legal battles will continue. Still being found not guilty in federal court is a massive victory for Combs, who now sports gray hair, having spent the months leading up to his highly anticipated trial behind bars. Diddy! People are saying money talks. Even so, God is his ultimate judge. Part 2, Judgment Day is coming. This is not the end for Diddy. It will get worse, says Ginger. Dwayne says he might serve half of the 10 years until Uncle Trump pardons him for early release. Money bought that whole case to a quick ending. Heather, absolutely not. I agree 100%. follow the money. Kyla says he's not going to survive the 10 years. When the justice system fails us, leave it to our prisoners to hold them in proper justice trust. Lola says, yeah, pretty much knew that it was going to happen. Hope he gets all the 10 years. Michaela says, what? Acquitted. Trafficking.
Guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Not guilty of racketeering conspiracy. Not guilty of sex trafficking. Kira?
All right, let's put this in perspective now that we know where Sean Combs has been found guilty and non-guilty. Let's put into perspective, Brian, on time he will serve. What are we looking at now with regard to years? Of course, we should point out there will be an appeal. He's got plenty of money to do that. But let's take it from where it stands right now.
Kira, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this. I'm not even sure if I would say there would be an appeal, because for Sean Combs and his defense team, this is a massive win. 3 of the counts that had a life sentence possibility are gone. When it comes to transportation to engage in prostitution, the minimum is nothing. There's a theoretical possibility that he walks out on probation. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No, but the max is 10 years. Even if you were to take both sentences, and he's not going to get 10 years, they're going to look at his criminal history, mitigating circumstances, aggravating circumstances, and I would assume that he gets somewhere in the middle ground, maybe like 3 to 5 years, 3 to 6 years possible through that sentencing range for each count. Sean Combs going to trial where he was facing life and being able to walk out with something under 10 years, well under 10 years possibly, that is a victory. Will he appeal? Sure, that's his right to do so, but I don't see an appeal here. I think you take this as a win, you serve the few years that you may get, and you be happy that you didn't get life. I'm somewhat shocked as to the trafficking for Cassie. I thought that might have been a stronger case for the government. I didn't think that they had the RICO, and I definitely didn't think they had the Jane trafficking. But this is, I think it only so many words, and I keep saying it, I think this is a positive result for Sean Combs and his team.
I'm being told now Combs is hugging his lawyer at this very moment. Clearly, he's seeing it as you are seeing it as well. You know, we should point out, Brian, let's look at bigger picture here. He is a music producer. He created a brand around him.
All right, the United States versus Sean Combs, y'all. Not guilty on count 1, which was the very serious racketeering conspiracy, right? Not guilty count 2, trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. He was found guilty of count 3, transportation to engage in prostitution. Not guilty again on the trafficking, force, fraud, or coercion. Guilty on another charge of transportation to engage in prostitution.
Himself, he was a big part of bringing hip hop into the mainstream. There is an entire entertainment business side to this. How do you see, from your experience, this win, as you are saying, for Sean Combs? How will it impact his business empire?
I think, for lack of a better term, there was always going to be
and that's all they want to do, impact his business empire. You see what I'm saying? And unfortunately, Sean Combs put himself in a trick bag to where they could definitely, jeopardize the future of his, money, his business, his success, his career. So
a blemish on Sean Combs' career. I think people are going to look at this in 2 different ways. In one way, they're going to say that Sean Combs probably had a history of getting into trouble with the law and somehow getting out from underneath it. They're going to look at past events through both civil and criminal complaints and say, you know what, he's always had good lawyers or whatever it may be, and he's gone away with bad charges, especially looking at that Intercontinental video. But I think the other view of this is going to be is that he was tried by a jury of his peers. All of the information, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between was shown to these 12 people, and they did not see the criminal enterprise. They did not see the force, fraud, and coercion. And I think the trafficking to engage in prostitution, I think that's going to be a lighter blemish on his career in terms of the totality of what we saw, as to like, okay, so he paid for people to go across state lines to have consensual sex. And I think consensual sex will be a big part of the conversation based on how the verdict came out. And so do I think he takes a big knock in terms of this case? Yes, but we've seen Sean Combs rebrand and come back from a lot of things, and that is a possibility here.
But let's put it into the context, Aaron Katursky, of the Me Too movement. I don't think anybody can forget the video, the surveillance video that we saw over and over again in that hotel hallway of Sean Combs barely naked in a towel, kicking and dragging Cassie Ventura.
It's an unforgettable piece of video, and it was one of the most visceral pieces of evidence that the jury saw during the course of a nearly 2-month trial, Kira. And the defense really admitted what's depicted on it is domestic violence, but they said all along he's not charged with domestic violence. The defense insisted, even though the defense did not put on much of a case, called no witnesses, that what was depicted was not sex trafficking, and the jury seems to have agreed. And Sean Combs is clearly taking this outcome of a split verdict, guilty on only the transportation for the purposes of as a win. The jury has been excused. As the 8 men and 4 women stood to leave their seats, Sean Combs made praying hands in their direction and bowed his head slightly as if to say thank you. When the outcome was read aloud in court, Combs put his hands in the air and looked to the ceiling, clearly taking this as a win that he was acquitted on the most serious charges he faced, Kira.
And now I understand, Aaron, his attorneys are calling for him to actually be released today. Could that happen?
Well, it could happen because he has already served about a year's time, a little shy of a year, and there will be a sentencing date. What the defense is likely arguing is that he is now no longer has anything to do with a violent crime. Transportation for the purposes of prostitution carries a maximum sentence of 10 years, a minimum of nothing. So it will be up to the judge to decide, but where he is no longer accused of a violent crime, the defense may have a good case to get him released until he is formally sentenced. If that happens, it's possible he could walk right out the golden doors here. Certainly a number of Certainly a number of his and others are waiting. Members of certainly a number of his supporters and others are waiting. Members certainly a number of his supporters and others are waiting. Members certainly a number of his supporters and others are waiting. Members certainly a number of his supporters and others are waiting. Members of certainly a number of his supporters and others are waiting. Members
Y'all, I don't know what the fuck's going on with my thing. I'm over here trying to fix my thumbnail, but my computer's like lagging and dragging and staggering.
One who
Let me
has
try to
been in
get
the
it
courtroom
together.
for cases that involve domestic violence. Knowing what we know about what happened and how he treated these women. And now looking at this outcome, how he's been acquitted on the most serious charges. Your overall thoughts moving forward about what this says about the Me Too movement, the power of a music mogul when he has money, when he has fame. Your thoughts?
So So my thoughts, I think, I try to go beyond just being an attorney. And I'll try to sidestep that and just talk as a man, as an adult. I think there can be no mixing of words as to what Sean Combs is when it comes to the treatment of women.
I'm about to go in here and work on my Wi-Fi box. Y'all, I don't know what the hell.
Full stop.
Wi-Fi booster.
Period. There's no question as to what we saw
This glitch and shit
in
getting on my
terms of
nerves.
the strength of the women who took the stand and testified about the abuse that happened to them. There's no question about the photos we saw of Cassie in terms of the bruising of her body, the bruise.
Okay, yeah. Let me go in here and work on my Wi-Fi box. Stupid shit. I don't know what the fuck going on with my Wi-Fi boosters?
In terms of the bruising of her body, the bruise. In terms of the bruising of her body, the
Go play. Go play.
in terms of the bruising of her body, the in terms of the bruising of her body, the bruising of her face, and the violence in that Intercontinental Hotel. Full stop. There's no justification of that. There's no explanation of that. And I think in terms of the Me Too movement, there should be strength in the fact that those women were believed in terms of what they said. Putting my attorney cap hat back on for a moment, I think the difficulty of this and what may be perceived, and I hope it's a perception and not a reality of the Me Too movement. Of the Me Too movement taking a step back. of the Me Too movement taking a step back. Based on this verdict, I would believe to be trafficking in RICO, that misstep and misperception.
Okay, y'all, I turned my
is what led
Wi-Fi pods back in.
The SDNY,
My internet acts right. I don't know why it's not acting.
why has phenomenal prosecutors, has a phenomenal office.
Get you a coloring book.
And their record speaks for itself, but I think
Get a coloring book.
in this case, they overestimated the
So let me refresh my stuff, y'all. I don't know what's going on.
My name's Travis Sarno. This will be my 12th year in Major League Baseball. I'm Chase Sarno, former Major League shortstop and co-founder of Darno Athletics Baseballism Academy. This partnership with WM has been a godsend. They do.
It has been heavily engaged in this from the beginning. There's been constant communication between
now about this case, Bernarda. I asked Brian this question as an attorney who has been involved with domestic violence cases. I want to ask you as well your thoughts on what this means for the victims.
For the victims, I think this is a slap in the face for the victims. I think this is going to deter victims from coming forward and telling their story and being the voice for the voiceless in the sense of representing other victims that are not willing to come forward. I know that for a fact, I'm sure that the prosecution right now is very upset with this verdict because they definitely put a lot of time into this prosecution and into this investigation. And they also did a lot of comforting of trying to give strength to these women, to Jane and to Cassie, to strength to these women, to Jane and to Cassie, to come forward. Strength to these women, to Jane and to Cassie, to come forward, to show their face, to share their story. And this is not just like any other regular domestic violence case or just any type of abuse case. You're dealing that they were stepping forward to speak against a music mogul, a person who had the key to New York City, one of the most powerful people in the industry. So just think of how scared they were to come forward and to tell their story and scared of what could happen once they came forward. Because I'm sure with social media and people talking in the news that they have received a lot of threats and people commenting about who they are and what they've done and that they are liars. But they and they alone know what happened to them. And they had prosecutors that believed in them and believed their story and became their voice.
Aaron, I understand court has now been adjourned. Combs was escorted out. A massive applause was heard from within the courtroom.
The judge
Okay,
said
guys,
court is adjourned for
I'm
now,
so sorry, my
Kira.
internet.
He's going to give the parties until 1 p.m. Eastern time to submit letters arguing for or against his release on bail. The judge left the bench until later on this afternoon when he'll give his decision. Once the judge was off the bench, Sean Combs was escorted out by the marshals. The judge told him he's going to have to cool his heels in the courthouse for a bit. But as he left the courtroom, there were applause from the gallery, some cheers in the gallery, where members of his family have been in steadfast vigil. His mother here most days, his twin daughters back, his sons have been here most days. They cheered for their father after he was acquitted of the most serious charges that he faces, still convicted of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And now we await the decision as to whether he's going to be released on bail. If he is, he will walk out to a crowd that includes people holding up Sean John T-shirts and other supporters who have been here saying, "Where's the Rico?" They've been shouting that into the street for weeks, and they would certainly welcome this verdict if he is to walk out those golden doors, Kira. For the jury, they really had to make a difficult decision, not just on the racketeering conspiracy, but as the defense said, the women that Combs was accused of trafficking were also his long-term girlfriends. Cassie Ventura with him for 11 years, Jane with him for more than 3 years. And the defense tried to argue that they were consensual relationships, that they were in it just as much as he was because that was their lifestyle, even though they freely admitted the polyamorous swingers kink was not everybody's cup of tea. But he said these women were in it, and it required the jury to make distinctions between consent and coercion and love and control and free will. And in the end, they acquit on the most serious charges that carried a minimum sentence of 15 years, acquitting on sex trafficking in addition to the racketeering conspiracy, Kira.
Bernard, I want to bring you back in on that. As Aaron was saying, this really came down to violence and fear versus love, infidelity, and jealousy. We are watching the doors now to see if lawyers will be coming out and coming to the mics. But Bernarda, Sean Combs may be acquitted of the most serious charges here. But let's talk about the impact all of this will have on ongoing civil cases.
Yes, so you have to think, so even though he was acquitted of the most serious charge in this criminal case, when we're talking about a civil case, it's a different burden. The criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. When you're dealing with civil cases, it's by a preponderance of the evidence, 51% versus 49%. But then again, with a civil case, he's just at risk of losing his empire in terms of money, but his liberty is no longer at stake. So he can live to fight those cases outside of jail bars.
You bring up a good point, because if he would have been found guilty of racketeering, that could have forced him to forfeit all his businesses, right?
Absolutely. So if he would have been found guilty of racketeering conspiracy and of the sex trafficking, anything that was used in order to facilitate this crime. So, for example, his mansions in Florida and his mansion in Los Angeles would have been at risk that it would have been taken away from the government, since there was evidence.
Okay, so he is still able, because of the non-guilty on racketeering, to keep businesses that are still in place.
That was put forth, having to deal with that.
Not to be jeopardized by the racketeering. Businesses, homes, assets. Businesses, homes, and assets for Diddy will not be compromised due to the racketeering found not guilty.
Was put forth, having to deal with that some of the sex.
So it's really now just up to seeing and saying what the judge will say. What the judge will say.
was put forth, having to deal with that some of the sexual.
What? I turned it back on.
Was put forth, having to deal with that some of the sexual.
Which one? Galaxy A15? You want to come in here? Close the door.
Trafficking took place inside of those homes. So he
Hello,
would have
don't
been
be
at
in
risk
there.
of losing that and also a lot of his businesses and his money.
In his closing argument, one of Combs' defense attorneys asked jurors to summon the courage to acquit Combs, who conceded he could be violent, jealous, and a drug user, but whose lawyers argued the case is badly exaggerated to make Combs like something he is not. Do you think that's what happened, Brian Buckmeyer?
I think, I don't know. This one I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, and I apologize. I'm trying to get information from different people as I go about this, trying to get information from people inside the court.
All right, so what we are seeing and hearing, live update, Sean Combs acquitted of sex trafficking but found guilty on lesser charges. The music mogul celebrated after being found not guilty of trafficking and racketeering conspiracies. He was convicted of transporting people for prostitution and could be released on bond right now until sentence. Here's the latest. Sean Combs was acquitted on Wednesday, today, of trafficking and racketeering charges, but convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution after an 8-week federal trial. A jury in Manhattan found Mr. Combs 55 not guilty of the most serious charges against him. Prosecutors had accused the famed producer of coercing two former girlfriends, Cassandra Ventura and a woman who testified pseudonymously as Jane, into unwanted acts with male prostitutes, aided by a team of Planned employees. Ultraviolet, a women's rights organization, made a statement in response to the Sean Combs verdict. This is a decisive moment for our justice system, one which threatens to undo the sacrifice of courageous survivors who stepped forward to share their stories in this trial, as well as to all those abused by Diddy who weren't able to, said Arisha Hatch, the organization's interim executive director. Today's verdict is not just a stain on a criminal justice system that for decades has failed to hold accountable abusers like Diddy. It's also an indictment of a culture in which not believing women and victims of sexual assault remains endemic. We will continue to stand with the brave women and men who took great risk to reveal the person Diddy really is. So Julia Jacobs reports from the courthouse. What is a bit remarkable is that yesterday evening, the jury said it was deadlocked on the racketeering conspiracy charge, which accused Sean Combs of running a criminal enterprise responsible for crimes over 2 decades. It said that there were unpersuadable opinions on both sides. Okay, so neither side of the jury were able to be persuaded for the more serious crimes. Then this morning, jurors came to a full verdict after less than an hour of deliberation. So apparently the judge, he went along with the Allen motion that the prosecutors wanted the jurors to hurry up, push things along so they could go and, celebrate their 4th of July with their families, okay? Because the jury was not convinced that Mr. Combs was responsible for trafficking, you can see how it would have been uncertain on racketeering as well, right? A significant part of the alleged conspiracy, according to the prosecutors, was based on accusations that Mr. Combs' employees help facilitate X trafficking. Outside the courthouse, Douglas Whitger, a lawyer for Cassandra Ventura, said he was pleased that Mr. Combs had been held accountable for something. Mr. Whitger said he's finally been held responsible for 2 federal crimes, something that he's never faced in life. The biggest victory for the defense here was convincing jurors that 2 former girlfriends of Sean Combs, Cassandra Ventura and Jane, were not coerced into freakouts and hotel nights, also known as King Nights, extended X sessions with male escorts over a period of years. Through vigorous cross-examinations of witnesses, Mr. Combs' lawyer pointed to text messages in which the women conveyed enthusiasm for the actual encounters. The women testified that they were telling Mr. Combs what they knew he wanted to hear and that they were stuck in a manipulative and controlling relationship. Bottom line, the jury did not view Mr. Combs' treatment of his girlfriends as X trafficking. The jury in Sean Combs' X trafficking and racketeering conspiracy trial, which revealed some internal conflict during deliberations, was a racially diverse group of 8 men and 4 women who range in age from 30 to 74 and live in Manhattan, Westchester County, and the Bronx. The court has not released the names of the jurors, which is common in high-profile trials where their safety is a concern. On Wednesday, the jury announced that it found Mr. Combs not guilty of the most serious charges against him, X trafficking and racketeering conspiracy, while convicting him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. So one of the transportation to engage in prostitutions were not dropped. They were both found guilty. Okay, he was convicted of both of those charges. Both of those charges each carry a sentence of 10 years apiece. So depending on how the judge wants to run that, he can run it concurrently or consecutively, right? Concurrent means to stand together. Consecutive means to run alone and serve each sentence once they finish back to back. Okay. So I don't see how this is necessarily such a big win. You know what I'm saying? He's still got 2 felony charges, which are X crime charges. Diddy may have to register as an X offender. Okay, let me take a look at that. If you are convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, do you have to register as an X offender? If you are convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, do you have to register as a sex offender? Let's ask Siri. Okay. Generally, a conviction for transportation to engage in prostitution under federal law like 18 U.S.C. 2421 requires registration as a X offender under the X Offender Registration and Notification Act. So Diddy will have to register as a X offender under the X Offender Registration and Notification Act. Registration requirements can vary depending on the state laws. Okay. Convictions of under state laws for prostitution or solicitation of prostitution generally do not require ex-offender registration unless the offense involved actual assault or exploitation of a minor. So he may or may not have to register. Okay. Human trafficking, which can involve transportation for prostitution, often results in ex-offender registration due to the severity of the crime and its connection to organized criminal activity, especially when minors are involved. So being that minors were not involved and they did not, I'm not sure if they're gonna say the assault on Cassie was anything actual, but to make Diddy qualified to register as an ex-offender, okay? That's still for debate. We're going to have to keep an eye on that, sippers, and see. Thank you guys so much for sipping tea with Tanisha. We are, okay, live, Diddy convicted and acquitted at the same damn time, what will say the judge for sentencing? Will he get a maximum of 10 years on each charge, each conviction, or will he get the lesser of the two? So let's ask Siri. If you're convicted on 2 charges of sexual, hold on. There's so much crap going on with Diddy. Hold on. Let me see. If you're convicted of 2 charges of transportation to engage in prostitution, what can your sentencing look like? A conviction for 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution can lead to significant penalties. Each count carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison and the possibility of fines. If the individuals were minors, the penalties could be even more severe. Being that they were not minors, Diddy does not have to worry about that. Minors were not entered into this case. Each count of transportation to engage in prostitution carries a maximum of 10 years in prison. This offense is often prosecuted under 18 U.S.C. 2421, which prohibits transporting individuals across state lines with the intent that they engage in prostitution or other sexual activity. Fines, along with imprisonment, individuals convicted of these offenses may also face substantial fines. So Diddy has multiple accounts. He has 2 charges that he was convicted under transportation of prostitution, right? When multiple counts are involved, the sentences can be served consecutively, one after the other, or concurrently at the same time, potentially leading to a longer total prison sentence. Okay?
I think, let me try to put it into words. I think when it comes to this case, this might have been more about how the case was handled than the actual people who testified. I could see how this might be an indictment on the women who testified, and I would say, as someone who watched them, I don't think it should be. I think, if anything, this is about how the case was handled by the government in terms of how they argued it, how they presented it, and the people that were selected. People even selected being the jurors, not the team themselves. And so I think as we move forward with this case and we see what's going to happen, because there is a possibility, although small, that Sean Combs walks out today, I think we just take stock of what we heard, what was argued, and what the result was, and not lay this at the feet of anyone who testified.
And now I understand, Aaron, a statement has been given on behalf of Cassie Ventura, star witness in this case. What are you learning?
Her attorney, Doug Wigdor, just sent us the following statement. This entire criminal process started when our client, Cassie Ventura, had the courage to file her civil complaint in November 2023. And Kira, we should say that's true. The criminal investigation is largely based on the statements in Cassie Ventura's lawsuit, and intensified, of course, once video from the 2016 hotel security camera became public. The statement from Doug Wigdor, her attorney, goes on to say, although the jury did not find Combs guilty of sex trafficking Cassie beyond a reasonable doubt, she paved the way for a jury to find him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. By coming forward with her experience, Cassie's attorney, Doug Wigdor, goes on to say, Cassie has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. We must repeat with no reservation that we believe and support our client, who showed exemplary courage throughout this trial. She testified for 4 days, often quite emotionally so, giving graphic, explicit detail of what she said she was made to do. And Sean Combs did not deny the facts of the freak-offs. Everything that happened in those hotel rooms did not get challenged by the defense. The defense simply saw it differently, as something that went on in a personal, consensual relationship, not sex trafficking. And that's how the outcome is reflected now, Kira.
Bernardo, I want to go on to read another part of that statement on behalf of Cassie Ventura's attorney, saying she displayed unquestionable strength and brought attention to the realities of powerful men in our orbit and the misconduct that has persisted for decades without repercussion. This case proved that change is long overdue, and we will continue to fight on behalf of survivors. Two things that stood out to me: powerful men in our orbit and the misconduct that persists, and change that is long overdue. Your thoughts?
Power and money. You can buy yourself out of a conviction. Let's be honest that if Sean Combs wasn't able to get the team that he got and pay for that defense team and experts and investigators to help defend himself, that we would have had a different outcome today. But money and power, that you can still get away with crimes if you have money and power. But I have to say, I was in the courtroom for Cassie's testimony, and she was a strong, strong witness. You can tell that the courage that she had, the strength that she exhibited. I mean, when she spoke and when she would cry from time to time, when she revisited those freak-offs and when she revisited those times when Sean Combs brutally beat her, and to see her in court sitting down, showing the strength and courage that she was able to overcome this. I think one of the most strongest moments that brought people to tears is when she said at some point that she went home and she told her husband, "You can do this without me," and that she wanted to cross the street and commit suicide because of what she had been through. But I'm glad that Cassie has been able to pick herself up and has been able to move on, taking it day by day, because it does show the strength that she got as a result of coming forward. That coming forward helped to bring closure to her.
Bernardo, thank you. Aaron, getting more insight from Sean Combs inside that courtroom, saying this coming from journalists in the press room. He was overcome with emotion as the verdict was read. His feet were visibly shaking throughout the reading of the verdict.
He has been an emotional defendant throughout the entire case. In fact, at one point, the judge had to admonish his attorney that Combs was gesturing and trying to make eyes with jurors as if to attempt to influence them when they were hearing certain testimony. And the judge made him sit straight and silent throughout much of the testimony. But as the verdict was being read, he started gesturing. He got down on the floor after it was over to kneel in prayer. Applause broke out into the courtroom. And I'm struck, Kira, the crowd has gathered here outside. And in the windows of the upper floors, courthouse employees are peering down to look at the streetscape below as more people rush toward these doors in anticipation of a possible release on bail sometime later on today, Kira.
And as we wait to hear what the outcome of that is, of course, if indeed the judge decides he could be released today, Brian Buckmeyer, let's talk about the jury makeup here and how it influenced this case, you think. We talked about the fact that it was 8 men, 4 women. Your thoughts on the number of men in this case versus women, and how you see that influencing what happened here?
Yes, I know oftentimes when we look at jurors, we look at race or gender. And yes, there's a possibility that the number of men in this case could have been beneficial to Sean Combs in terms of trying to decide what this relationship was like. But I think probably more importantly than race or gender would be age. And the reason why I say that is because when it comes to the conversation as to whether or not these were consensual relationships, which appears to be at the heart of the jury's verdict in terms of saying, yes, we saw that you brought these people across state lines for prostitution, but we don't believe there was force, fraud, or coercion for trafficking, and we don't believe that there was a criminal enterprise or that there was not 2 predicate acts. Right? I think a large part of the not believing comes down to consent. And what I find, at least when I talk to a jury or just talk to people in general is there's a big divide in terms of what is consent when you talk to someone who is over the age of 40 or 45 and under the age of 40 or 45. And when you have a jury where more than half of them are 51 years to 74 years old. And even if you go even below that, there's a number of people who are in their 40s. I think the conversation and the argument that Mark Agnifilo and his team were having about what it means to consent works for people in that age demographic. I think if we had a jury that was predominantly in their 20s or early 30s, this argument of consent would be very different. So while I do see that there is value in looking at the gender or the sex of the jurors, I think the age told us a lot more based on the arguments we saw.
Bernarda, you think it was smart that Sean Combs did not take the stand?
Absolutely, absolutely. If Sean Combs would have taken the stand, this case would have become a deliberation of whether this jury believed what Sean Combs had to say, whether his demeanor came off as one as credible. Also, you have to think where if Sean Combs were to testify, there was a lot of evidence that the prosecution was not able to get in their case in chief because they were missing a link. And that link would have been Sean Combs. So they would have been able to get that evidence in had Sean Combs testified. So it would have changed the deliberation process, and we would have probably been looking at a completely different verdict. Also got to think, how would he be able to explain in terms of the brutal beating of Cassie and of Jane on that particular occasion?
Aaron, do you think we'll hear from the family? Sean Combs' mother, Janice, was in the courtroom along with his sons, his daughters. Are they expected to speak? Do you think they will speak?
I'm not sure. They haven't yet during the course of this trial, but the cars that they've been using to transport themselves to and from the courthouse are now pulling up to the front here, and they should be walking out those golden doors any moment. They may opt to wait until they know whether Combs is going to get released on bail, as his defense attorney argued he should be. And Combs almost seemed confident that the judge would grant it. He mouthed and said aloud to members of his family in the gallery, "I'm coming home, baby," after the split verdict here, acquitting him of the most serious charges, but finding him guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And because that is not a violent crime, the defense said that he has earned the right to get released on $1 million bail, as Combs offered to put up.
Aaron, we talk about the support outside of the courthouse there, the cheers that were heard from inside the courtroom. We should point out it's because he had his mom and his kids inside that courtroom. But if you want to talk about people showing up to support Sean Combs throughout all of this, the only celebrity that we witnessed, and correct me if I'm wrong, that came to show support was Kanye West.
That's right, and what a moment that was. The family now is coming out. You can see the mother of Sean Combs waving and giving a thumbs up. His sons walking out as well. Twin daughters, you can hear perhaps the cheers from some of the supporters, if you can hear them over the hum of the traffic. There were
works for people in that.
But finding him guilty of his twin daughters were here at the beginning. They came at the end. His sons were cheers from some of the supporters, if you can hear them over the hum of the traffic. Combs waving and giving a thumbs up. His son.
All right, there are the Combs families, y'all, leaving the courthouse. We don't know quite yet whether or not he will get bond bail, but however, he's willing to now give $1 million in bail. Okay, so yeah, we'll see if the judge accepts that while he's awaiting sentencing on 2 charges of transportation with prostitutes, okay, to engage in X. Let's see.
Walking out as well. Twin daughters, you can hear perhaps the cheers from some of the supporters, if you can hear them over the hum of the traffic. There were supporters in the courtroom throughout, a few outside, but only Kanye West showed up to court. And when he walked in his all-white suit, He said he was here to support Sean Combs, but he never saw him. He was not allowed inside the courtroom itself. He watched about 10 minutes of the proceedings inside an overflow room and was in and out of the courthouse in about 20 minutes, and we're not sure whether he was invited or not or showed up of his own volition. There really haven't been that many supporters apart from his family.
All right, entire family right there, walking out.
As you can see, waving and giving a thumbs up moments ago. Sean Combs has been largely left alone with members of his family, including the mother of at least one of his children. His twin daughters were here at the beginning. They came at the end. His sons were here throughout the case, as was his mother. And when the jury came back stuck yesterday, Combs turned to his mother and said, "It's going to be okay." And today, after the outcome, he turned to his family and said, "I'm coming home, baby."
Bernardo, let me pull something out of what Aaron just said. Sean Combs was largely left alone through all of this. We're talking about somebody that was a huge businessman, a music mogul, a producer, a huge part of making hip hop mainstream. He threw these lavish parties. He was always pointed to at big events and galas. The fact that Aaron said he was largely left alone, what does that tell you?
And he was. I was in a courtroom for the entire trial with the exception of one day. And literally the only person who showed up was Kanye. And the jury didn't get to see Kanye because he was in an overflow room. But in terms of being left alone, Kira, are you surprised? When you look at that video, the Intercontinental video, there's no running from it. And artists and celebrities, they wanted to run away from that because they didn't want to be associated with that type of violence. So it came down to money.
Bernardo, thank you. Aaron, want to take it to you as we reach the top of the hour here. We now wait to see if indeed the judge makes a decision. He says he will make it today if he will allow Sean Combs to be released and walk out those doors behind you.
The judge gave them several hours to make written arguments before he issues a decision on release on bail, but Sean Combs is already celebrating after he was acquitted of the most serious charges that he faced that could have sent him to prison for life. He was convicted of transporting people for the purposes of prostitution, but taking that as a win, even though in theory he still faces up to 20 years in prison, Kira.
And acquitted of the most serious charges. Bernardo, Brian, Aaron, thank you. We're going to return you now to your regular programming. For some of you, that is Good Morning America. But I do want to tell you about an ABC News special verdict, the Diddy trial, that will air tonight, 10 Eastern. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. The entire team will be here for World News Tonight with David Muir. I'm Kira Phillips. Thanks for staying with us.
Hi, I'm Diane Macedo, and we are following that breaking news. Sean Diddy Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering, conspiracy, or sex trafficking. He was found guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Court has now been adjourned as the judge decides whether he will release Combs today. I want to bring in ABC's Rena Roy outside court and ABC News entertainment contributor Kelly Carter for more. Rena, talk to me about the reaction here in the courtroom, really, when this verdict came down.
Diane, this was an incredibly emotional moment. Sean Combs was visibly overcome with emotion. His feet were shaking under the table as the verdict was being read, and he then got down on the ground, kneeling in prayer when he found out that he had been acquitted on the most serious charges, racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. He turned to his family and he said, "I'm coming home, baby." And there were loud cheers and applauses in the courtroom. We know that his family has been here to support him almost every single day of this trial. They actually just walked out of the golden doors of this federal courthouse here in Lower Manhattan just a couple of minutes ago. And there are a lot you can't see now because there's a bus here, but there are a lot of supporters here out here for him. Of course, people who also weren't so happy about this verdict. There's a lot of bloggers that have been covering this trial since day one, as well as all the media. We have been out here for almost 2 months at this point. Court is now adjourned for the day, but things are not over because the judge still has to weigh whether or not Combs will be released as early as today. That's what his defense attorneys are asking for, but prosecutors are arguing against that. So they both have several hours. The judge wants letters back from them making their cases at around 1 o'clock, and then we will potentially hear later today whether or not he will be released, Diane.
And I want to bring in our legal contributor, Bernardo Villalona, as well here on set with me. Bernardo, acquitted of the most serious charges, still found guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. Each of those carries a maximum. Each of the 2 counts he was found guilty of there carries a max of 10 years. So what does the judge have to consider now, not only in terms of sentencing, but in terms of whether or not Sean Combs should be released today?
Sean Combs should be released today. He was acquitted of the most serious charges, and those also having to deal with violence. I was at his bail applications for the 3 times that he made a bail application. And the huge sticking point by the prosecution, by the government, is the violence itself, and that he was intimidating witnesses and still in contact and breaking the rules while he was in custody. Now, at this moment, those were allegations. Now a jury of his peers has spoken and has found him not guilty. So those are no longer allegations. So he should be freed. In terms of what the judge is going to consider is, 1, that he was acquitted. 2, that the sentence that he is facing, there is not a mandatory minimum. So technically, the judge can even sentence him to probation or to time served. 3, whether there's a risk of flight, of him not returning to face sentencing date. That is highly unlikely, especially since Sean Combs knows what the exposure is, and also that for him to flee, it will give him a bigger exposure and almost guaranteed a jail sentence if he weren't to come back. So the judge should release him today. In terms of sentencing, now that's a long process there. The first thing that's going to take place is that the judge is going to order the Department of Probation to do a probation report and a probation interview of Sean Combs and do a deep dive into his background and ultimately make a recommendation as to what the sentence is going to be. Best believe that that intercontinental video is going to come back into light when it comes to sentencing, because the judge can take into account criminal acts that he wasn't convicted of when determining a sentence, a just sentence for Sean Combs. But given that he has a lack of criminal record in terms of something serious, it's highly likely that the judge will give him something under relation as to time served, or maybe just a few more months in terms of being incarcerated, since he was found guilty of 2 counts that technically can run consecutive.
Now, the prosecution has already said they're going to be seeking a severe sentence here, or a significant sentence. What do you think that means in terms of what they're going to at least try for?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if the prosecution doesn't ask for the max and ask for the sentences to be consecutive.
Just 20 years.
Yes, for 20 years, the max, because it's 10 years max as to each of these counts, and they can actually run consecutive. The prosecution is going to name out that, look, when it came to transportation to engage in prostitution, we're not talking about just 1 instance or 2 instances. During their closing arguments, they put up a photograph of 27 men that were actually trafficked as a result of doing these freak-offs and these hotel nights. So the prosecution is going to try to seek the maximum amount of sentence and also include those acts that he was found not guilty of in terms of that intercontinental video, and get statements from Jane and Cassie in order to try to move this judge to try to get the maximum sentence, which again is highly unlikely.
Bernardo, the defense argued throughout that all of the sexual encounters in this case were consensual. Does the fact that the jury found him not guilty of sex trafficking mean they agreed with that?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that the prosecution has to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. So just because a person is found not guilty doesn't mean that they necessarily said that they found that they weren't any freak-offs or that it wasn't consensual, but that there was some seed of doubt that prevented them from saying that he is guilty. When they say not guilty, it's not saying that they're proclaiming that Sean Combs is innocent. What it is that person, Sean Combs, is being acquitted. That verdict says that the prosecution did not prove this count beyond a reasonable doubt, but not necessarily that they believe in their heart that Sean Combs didn't commit these acts and that it wasn't consensual.
And I want to bring in our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katersky, who's been at the court throughout this whole trial. Aaron, what sticks out to you about the way this verdict came down and the discussions that these attorneys are now having as they write letters to the judge about whether or not Combs should be released?
They have several hours now, Diane, to make the case whether Sean Combs should be released on bail. Combs himself offered $1 million bail, and the judge indicated to him that he did not want to go back to MDC, the federal lockup in Brooklyn where he's been held. And that's when he clasped his hands together as if to say, that's exactly right, Judge. And so the judge said he would decide today whether to release him on bail. Prosecutors asked for a few hours to put their letter in opposing it. He does still, as prosecutors point out, face the possibility of 20 years in prison on the conviction of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And the way prosecutors see it, he's a flight risk and a potential danger. Even though they did not prove the sex trafficking or the racketeering conspiracy, prosecutors still told the judge he has a predilection to committing crimes, including violent crimes, and represents a potential danger, particularly to women. He also, we should say, Diane, faces at least 6 civil lawsuits that accuse him of acts of violence. We'll see where those shake out in the coming weeks and months, but Combs would no doubt like to try and fend those off as quickly as possible. Outside here, Diane, there is a crowd of supporters that looks like they're going to hang out to see whether he walks through those golden doors sometime this afternoon.
And I want to drill down on those civil suits with our legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer, also here with me on set. Brian, I think it's in the realm of 60 civil lawsuits against Sean Combs right now. How does this verdict impact those cases?
Yeah, so about 60 or 59 civil lawsuits. I believe 14 of them involve a minor. And so the impact for those cases on this is somewhat positive in some lights, actually, ironically enough, and somewhat negative. The negative, obviously, in that he was found not guilty of the RICO conspiracy and the sex trafficking. So if there's any allegations that mirror that in these civil complaints, Sean Combs is going to feel very confident that he might be able to win those. But different allegations, different alleged victims. And I think, as Bernardo pointed out as well, there's a different standard there. And it comes to a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, a much higher standard than the civil standard of preponderance of evidence, more likely than not, or 51%. But the reason why I say it could be potentially positive for those filing civil lawsuits is if Sean Combs was found guilty of that racketeering conspiracy, there would be a forfeiture application in terms of trying to dismantle that racketeering conspiracy, or that criminal enterprise, where the federal government would have had their opportunity to take money out of Sean Combs before the civil lawsuits would have had their opportunity. So in a way, Sean Combs may still have enough money in his pocket that those filing civil lawsuits might be able to find a victory through that process. I compare and contrast to, for example, the R. Kelly trial, where he was found guilty of racketeering conspiracy, and there was a forfeiture there, and many of the people filing civil lawsuits against R. Kelly found it difficult to win in those cases.
And I want to bring in Kelly Carter to talk about the cultural impact here, because, Kelly, it's hard to understate or overstate, I should say, the role of Sean Combs in music and culture in general. I mean, not only was he a legend in rap music, he was a legend in music in general, as a producer, as an artist, and then on to becoming a businessman with an empire. What does this mean for all that now?
I mean, I think it means a lot. The truth of the matter is that it almost didn't really matter what the outcome was of this trial. The conversation changes immediately about what his legacy is. You know, this is a person who really touched every corner of pretty much every industry. Not just music, not just spirits, not just fashion, politics, pretty much every industry he touched. He really ushered the hip-hop generation into the mainstream, into commercialism, and made it the billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar industry that it is right now. And I think, you know, regardless of the outcome, it's going to be difficult for people to unhear some of that testimony and to certainly unsee, you know, that infamous now Intercontinental video that was released with him and Cassie from 2016. And I think that it'll be interesting to see what his life is like as a businessman moving forward, but I don't expect to see something in the immediacy. And I definitely expect us to be dissecting his legacy for a good while now.
And we do have a statement from Cassie Ventura's attorney, Douglas Wigdor. And he says, and I'm quoting here, "This entire criminal process started when our client, Cassie Ventura, had the courage to file her civil complaint in November of 2023. Although the jury did not find Combs guilty of sex trafficking Cassie beyond a reasonable doubt, she paved the way for a jury to find him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. By coming forward with her experience, Cassie has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. We must repeat with no reservation that we believe and support our client, who showed exemplary courage throughout this trial." The statement goes on to talk about her strength on the stand and to talk about the misconduct they say has persisted for decades without repercussion. Bernardo, I want to go to you on this point of what this means for future cases, precedent here. Does a verdict like this deter future potential witnesses in similar cases?
I think it definitely does. A verdict like this does deter victims and witnesses from coming forward. I think when you're talking about when the perpetrator is one of who has power, who has money, who had the key to the city, I think victims are looking at it, wait, if the prosecution gave it all they had and they went after him and they still didn't find him guilty, what about little old me? What about just regular perpetrator from down the block? What's going to happen in that type of case? So I think this is a huge deterrence for victims.
And Brian, I'm out of time, but I quickly want to touch on the way this case was brought has been criticized from the beginning. The actual charges they brought, the fact that it was a federal trial and so on. Walk me through that part of it. And do you think there are any legal lessons learned there?
I think there are legal lessons in terms of how to bring this case. I think for federal prosecutors, they've used the RICO statute in very creative ways. If you want to talk about R. Kelly, if you want to talk about Donald Trump, there have been people who have been in the spotlight who have bemoaned and said that this is not how the statute is meant to be. And I think this might be one of the first major setbacks in this use of the statute in this kind of new wave. And I think this is going to be, agreeing with what Bernardo said, but I'll add on to a reevaluation of how do we define RICO going forward? Who fits into a RICO? What is a criminal enterprise? And are we going to open or close off how we now progress or move forward in terms of evaluating should we use this statute for these different types of enterprises?
All right. Rena, Brian, Bernardo, Kelly, thank you all. And big thanks to Aaron Katursky, who again has been at that courthouse from the very beginning. Also, for more on today's verdict, catch the ABC News Live show Burden of Proof, the case against Diddy, streaming tonight at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Meanwhile, the rough weather is complicating Republicans' race to pass President Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill. Speaker Johnson says the House could vote on it as soon as today after the Senate narrowly passed the bill yesterday. And now the president's planning to meet with Republicans at the White House to get it done. Let's bring in ABC News Capitol Hill correspondent Jay O'Brien and ABC News senior White House correspondent Selena Wang for more on that. Hi, Jay. So what's the latest on this potential vote?
Yeah, so we're still tracking a preliminary vote, a key procedural vote, the first hurdle for this bill as it's come back to the House. To be sometime this afternoon now. It was actually supposed to be as we speak, but that's been kicked a little bit into noon. So this is the vote on what's called the quote-unquote rule. The rule is what kicks off your ability to vote on this legislation in the first place. And what you're seeing there on the floor are members debating this rule. And forgive me as I scroll here on my phone, because I just caught up with Speaker Johnson not long ago, and I asked him, does he have the votes to get this over the goal line? Because right now, by our count, he's got at least a dozen in his party who say that they are either firm no's, or they're weighing no, or they're holdouts. And as you said, a number of them have shuttled back and forth from the Capitol here to the White House to be worked on by the White House to try to get from no to yes. Speaker Johnson said, quote, "We're working on everything," but he wasn't necessarily clear that he has the votes in his column right now. Steve Scalise, the number 2 Republican in the House, also earlier today saying that this procedural vote, the one I was just mentioning, the one that's imminent, it's going to probably happen.
Things are a lot better than they were yesterday, Diane. Right now, we are seeing just over 300 cancellations nationwide. That is considerably lower than what we were seeing yesterday when we had those storms coming in through the Northeast. Even out in Denver and Las Vegas, as you mentioned there on your screen, a dust storm stopped.
An alarming scene as a fight
complaint and her courage and her strength.
From now, and they are going to submit letters. Then there will be a hearing in open court as the judge decides whether to release Combs. The defense argued because he was acquitted of the most serious charges, he deserves release on bail. Combs offered $1 million, offered to put up his luxury homes, and certainly the court and everybody else saw these pictures of his opulent homes in Miami and in Los Angeles that were part of the case. Prosecutors opposed it, said Combs still faces the possibility of 20 years in prison, and therefore he should be held up until the time of sentencing, because it's still possible that he's going to be hauled off to jail, and he represents a flight risk and a danger otherwise because of a predilection of to commit other crimes, according to prosecutors. Combs told his family, "I'm coming home, baby," after he was acquitted of the most serious charges. Applause broke out in the courtroom. If he does get released on bail, we're told he is going to walk through those golden doors and make a statement outside here on the sidewalk. It would be an incredible moment if someone who's been incarcerated for the better part of a year is able to win release on bail and able to talk about the outcome of this trial.
Kelly, Combs has had such a huge influence on the music industry and beyond. What did these charges do for that? And does this verdict change anything?
I mean, the charges, it's definitely a mark on his legacy, and I think it's a significant one. You know, I think it's noticeable that, you know, we're not talking about the parade of famous people and titans of industry who showed up to support him in court. So I feel like that is indicative of probably what we should expect his status to be in the business world that he left, you know. And again, everything changed once that Cassie civil lawsuit dropped in 2023. I mean, we hadn't seen much of him since then. And certainly once he became incarcerated, we didn't see an outcrying of support from the biggest names in you know, Hollywood and in the music industry. So I do think that this changes things significantly for someone who, quite frankly, has been a cultural icon for 3 decades.
And Rena, I read a statement a little while ago from Douglas Wigdor, Cassie Ventura's attorney, talking about how critical she was to this case, how it all started with her civil complaint and her courage and her strength throughout this trial. But I know he also spoke outside the courthouse. What is he saying about her reaction to this verdict?
Diane, there is no question that Cassie Ventura was key in this case. Doug Wigdor spoke just a short time ago outside of court here, saying that Cassie Ventura is in a good place. He says that she's happy with this outcome. They would have, of course, preferred a guilty verdict across the board, but they say that they're proud of her courage here. Take a listen.
The reaction is that we're pleased that he's finally been held responsible for 2 federal crimes, something that he's never faced in his life. He still faces substantial jail time. Of course, we would have liked to have seen a conviction on the sex crimes in RICO, but we understand beyond a reasonable doubt is a high standard, and we're just pleased that that he still faces substantial jail time.
Now, Wigdor also said that he's proud of Cassie for shedding a light on this, saying that she has paved the way for other alleged victims to come forward. Remember, he is facing nearly 60 civil lawsuits at this point, so his legal troubles are far from over, Diane.
And Aaron, let's drill down on that a little bit. Where do those civil cases stand right now?
Well, they're all pending. There are more than 6 of them alleging all sorts of things. Some seem to be more credible than others. Some named plaintiffs, some not named plaintiffs. But Combs is going to have to reconcile with all of them. Most of them seek monetary damages primarily, and he's in a better position to fight them now, although there are some differences should any of them go to trial. The standard of proof is less in a civil case, preponderance of the evidence as opposed to beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they do go to trial and Combs opts not to testify, unlike in the criminal case, in a civil case, the jury is allowed to make an inference about why a defendant would choose not to testify. So it would work a little bit differently, but the focus now, Diane, is clearly on the possibility.
All right, we know what the state of
defense
Diddy is
in the
now
civil
as far as
cases
the
and
verdict
to
goes.
serve a
Diddy's
sentence.
ass was convicted of 2 of the transportation to prostitution, not the ex trafficking and all of that, coercion and force stuff. Okay. So we're going to keep the tea pouring on Diddy for the day of the verdict. Maybe a sentence will drop. We'll see. But we are also seeing if he'll get bail, right? Because Diddy proposed to get bail. So let's tap into Salon Crime and see what they're dropping tea on Diddy. This is outside the courthouse. Okay. Everybody's still pretty hot on Diddy, even though he was found guilty and not guilty at the same time of 5 charges.
Here yesterday as this partial verdict came down, which frankly for a lot of us was a shock that they would get this far. And I don't think I'm being overdramatic by saying that
jury instructions in and of themselves were very complicated. So you have to look at all of the breakdowns of these crimes, understand each one specifically, which is why they've had a few questions going back to the court. So I think that they are really hung up on a couple of things. One, understanding the law. Number 2, understanding what RICO means and how it really feels for them. Because I've spoken to a lot of people who could potentially be jurors at any time, right?
Kind of made their decision already in terms of counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so I was like, okay, is Sean Combs going to come inside the courtroom? Is he going to have that same kind of tone that he had yesterday? But it kind of was a little bit different, Chris, in that he came in, he was all smiles, especially when he initially saw his mother. He spoke to her initially just kind of walking into the courtroom. He did what he normally did, was kind of do the little hearts, talk to his mom a little bit. He was coming in with smiles, notably. And then after he gave the heart sign, he sits down, he reads kind of this note or this letter for a little bit. And then it seems like he was either writing something down, jotting something down. I'm not sure because his arms were kind of covering his body position. So I couldn't see if he was like writing a letter back or kind of what was going on there. But then for a moment, I saw kind of the defense kind of all huddled over into a circle area, just kind of talking things over. But the prosecution wasn't inside the courtroom. So I was thinking, okay, maybe a note hasn't been received. The jury is still continuing their deliberations after they started around maybe like 9:05 this morning. And then I saw the defendant kind of chatting with Xavier Donaldson for a little bit. Then Combs was kind of sitting alone for a little bit at the defense table. And then again, right.
As you're processing how all of this played out, as someone who covers
pro Diddy are definitely happy about it.
And I know we talked about when we signed off at the end of last hour, when Diddy's kids left, you saw his sons, his twin daughters, they got in that Sprinter van and they headed out after praying with their dad. And then he goes to wait out the jury deliberations. I know his mom and his sister were in the courtroom 10 weeks. It is inspiring. You worked together, rain or shine. You answered the call of public service. That should give
30 to 60 days from now. In the meantime, both sides will marshal their arguments. They will put forth sentencing memorandum. The defense counsel put together a memorandum. The prosecution put together a memorandum. And also the probation department, the pretrial services, they also put together a memo. They will interview Mr. Combs. They will, each of those 3 branches, if you will come up what they believe an appropriate sentence is. And then ultimately it's up to the judge to formulate whatever sentence he sees fit in this particular case.
And we'll get some reaction. I'm still waiting to get the description of what the courtroom was like in this moment with Sean Combs being found guilty on the most serious charge of racketeering conspiracy. But Candace, as you look at the not guilty verdict, what could the prosecution look back on and think maybe we should have done that to build a stronger case to maybe get a conviction on this?
Listen, the prosecution put on a very good case. Let's remember that there were no witnesses that the defense even chose to put on. They just said, you know what, you didn't make your case. The prosecution, I would think, if they were going to look back, I don't know, would they do something with Christina Coram? Maybe take that chance. Would they do something with this plethora of security guards that we know were within Sean's orbit that knew everything? Because we know Sean wasn't driving himself to places, Sean wasn't getting candles, and Sean wasn't picking up Astroglide. Are these the people that we should have heard from? Because certainly being in the gallery, these are the people that I wanted to hear from. Would they have provided some glue to any of this? I think that that's something to take into consideration. Who were the people that we have heard all throughout this trial, but we didn't bring? Could they have made a difference?
I want to bring our Sierra Gillespie in right now, who's outside the courthouse. Sierra, what is the vibe there?
I mean, I'm telling you, Chris, this came out of nowhere. No one was expecting that after 1 hour worth of deliberations, we would have a verdict. So much so, the P. Diddy's family left the courthouse. They thought they were probably going to go get some brunch or something, and all of a sudden they're turned around. So I'm telling you, the instant that people were able to show up, I'm shocked by it. There's a major crowd outside of the courthouse. I mean, I have no idea where all of these people came from just to surround and hear all of this. And I mean, I think the vibe is that this is a pretty big win for P. Diddy. I mean, not guilty on count 1 of racketeering. Huge win. I mean, that could potentially throw the life sentence out the window. And you can definitely tell in the crowd here, people who are pro Diddy are definitely happy about it.
And I know we talked about when we signed off at the end of last hour, when Diddy's kids left, you saw his sons, his twin daughters, they got in that Sprinter van and they headed out after praying with their dad. And then he goes to wait out the jury deliberations. I know his mom and his sister were in the courtroom, but did you see them get back? Were they there for this verdict?
I believe so that they were. And I'm telling you, straightforwardly, everything was a mess when we heard the verdict. Elizabeth Milner got up, ran inside. I jumped in, plugged in my microphone and my IFB, ready to go. So it was almost like a frenzy here. You can kind of feel the vibes, and that's what I'm trying to convey to you all, by the way, that here everyone can kind of feel the vibes that something wild is going on. I did see the commotion behind me. I did see the Sprinter van, but honestly, I was plugging in during all of this, so I didn't physically see them with my eyes, but I do believe that they were there in the courtroom.
And if you're just joining us here on Law and Crime on the live stream, it's great to be with you. We have a verdict in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs, and I want to read through this verdict for you once again, just so we're all on the same page. The judge the deputy, in the matter of the U.S. versus Combs, count 1, juror number 5, the foreman says not guilty. Sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura, not guilty. Transportation for prostitution, guilty. Sex trafficking of the victim that went by the pseudonym Jane, not guilty. And then transportation for prostitution of Jane, guilty. Have another court update coming in. The judge asking the media not to question jurors about their deliberations. Jurors, you can contact our chambers. You gave up a lot these 10 weeks. It is inspiring. You worked together, rain or shine. You answered the call of public service. That should give us hope. The judge then says, I need to address a few matters with the lawyers. Then I will come back to meet with you, jurors. All rise to the jury. Then the jurors then exit the courtroom, and the judge says, I'll hear any application then about sentencing date. Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, says he should be released. Combs Agnifilo says he is no longer charged with sex trafficking or racketeering. His plane has been chartered. It is in Maui. He does not have access to his plane. This is his first conviction, and it is a prostitution offense. He should be released. William Corman, criminal defense
attorney. So it's very likely that Diddy will be released on bail, being that none of the serious charges are pending or he's facing them any longer. He's not facing them any longer. So that's a possibility, y'all. What do you think? Do you think Diddy will make bail? Do you think they will give Diddy bail?
As someone in this line of work, how strong of an argument that is that Sean Combs should be released?
The problem is this. Combs has a significant amount of assets, and if Sean Combs chose not to come back to court to be sentenced, he would be able to do that. So again, correct, he has no criminal record. Correct, he's been found guilty only of the lowest hanging fruit, as we've been calling it.
Also, being that Diddy has no criminal record, how do you think he will be sentenced? Let's ask Siri. If a person has no criminal record and are convicted of 2 charges of transportation to engage in prostitution, what is their likely sentencing? Based on federal law and recent cases, a person with no criminal record convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution under the Mann Act could potentially face a maximum sentence of up to 10 years in prison for each count. Therefore, with 2 counts, the individual could be facing a maximum potential sentence of 20 years in prison. However, the actual sentence will depend on various factors considering by the judge, such as the specifics of the case, the individual's lack of criminal record, and the judge's discretion. Important considerations. While the maximum penalty is 10 years per count, legal experts suggest a starting point under U.S. sentencing guidelines might be a range of 15 to 21 months for such conviction. So Diddy might just get 2 years for each count. The judge ultimately determines the final sentence, which can be within or outside of the guideline range. Having no prior criminal record could be a factor in sentencing, potentially leading to a shorter sentence. For the charge of transportation to engage in prostitution, there is no mandatory minimum sentence. So, in summary, while a maximum of 20 years is possible, it is likely that the actual sentence for a first-time offender with no criminal record will be significantly less, potentially measured in months rather than years for the diddler. What say the sippers? Do y'all think Diddy will receive up to 10 years, maybe serving 5 in each count? Or do you think he'll get like 2 in each count, maybe serving or getting 4, maybe serving 2, being that Diddy's already served almost 1 year, doing only 1 year in federal prison? That's what I say. I believe that's what my tea is. Y'all drop it down in the chat. We are everything Diddy. Verdict came in, sippers. Get y'all's asses in here and get y'all's teacups filled up with the diddler. 2 accounts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Everything else dropped out on his goddamn ass, okay?
I think it's an argument that can be made. Obviously, the prosecution is going to argue against it vociferously. I'd be surprised if the judge went along with it, but candidly, I think we've all been a little surprised by what's happened in the past few hours. But again, I don't anticipate the judge will allow it.
Mark Agnifilo continuing on here saying his family is here and could sign a bond. He should be released today to go back and live at 2 Star Island, which is in Miami. Judge says, this is just coming up right now. I will hear from the government in a moment. Are you proposing he just walk outside now? And the defense says yes. Candace, there's going to be a lot of conversation about Sean Combs and his legacy. You can't unsee the 2016 video from the Intercontinental Hotel, that is for sure. But how does this verdict impact how people may view Sean Combs going forward?
You know, some people are going to view him as a hero. Some people are going to view him as a victim. They really will. Some people are going to say, what in the world? We were in there for 7 weeks and we heard all of this debauchery and all of these things that when we look at the cumulative effect of the evidence, I think he was guilty. So you're going to have people on both sides. But I think in terms of his legacy, personally, the legacy for him is going to still be his music. That's going to survive and live. But I think there's a legacy that's going to happen in terms of this case in particular. And when RICO is used, there's going to be a lot of conversation and information exchange online and on shows like yours about when do we really need to apply RICO, because out of this, I think that's what the largest conversation has been about. Yes, there was Astroglide and yes, there was baby oil, but what is this RICO and what does it mean? And is it being unfairly used by people who are in the music industry? Is it being unfairly used by people like him who happen to be rich and seemed like someone who we could make a big headline out of if we are the prosecutors? This is what the defense was saying in their closing argument, that this is just over prosecution of someone who, let's leave his legacy alone. There's nobody here who's coming after Sean Combs, but the government. Don't trust them. I think that that's going to be the lasting legacy of this case in particular.
And you think of the 2016 video once again, and it's the video of Sean Combs. He's in a towel. He's chasing after Cassie Ventura, and grabs her and beats her. It was video that Sean Combs then, according to testimony from a security guard, he paid off $100,000 to get rid of what he thought was the only copy. And yet, in the end, they find not guilty of sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura. William, what about her testimony just didn't get the job done? Or maybe should I say, what is it about the defense's argument that did get the job done and got a not guilty verdict?
I'm going to assume that it was the defense counsel's argument that was saying, look, this is a complicated relationship. This is a relationship that was fraught with domestic violence, but Sean Combs hasn't been charged with domestic violence. Sean Combs has been charged with this grand scheme, this RICO enterprise, if you will. And there's a big difference between being involved in the RICO scheme and being, unfortunately, a serial abuser. And if we were on trial for him being a serial abuser, there's no argument to be made. We've all watched the video. We're going to watch it 100 times during the course of this trial. But you can't make the connection between him being a serial abuser to him running this giant criminal enterprise, including the sex trafficking. Because again, there was a huge amount of digital footprints where she was involved in it and she was willing to go along with it and she was amenable to it and she indicated that she was into it and things along those lines. And those points obviously hit home with the jury.
And also not guilty on sex trafficking of the victim who went by the pseudonym Jane, who also there were text messages that the defense used to argue that these were consensual relationships. There's been a lot of talk, Candace. I want to say hello to the 55,000 people joining us right now for this coverage of the verdicts in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. There's been a lot of talk about just how good Sean Combs' defense team was, that this was the all-star dream team cast for a defense team. What did they do that is different than the typical defense attorney that you see in a courtroom?
Present witnesses, it was kind of like they did, in that they were able to jab holes into the witnesses on cross-examination. So really they had witnesses speaking on their behalf. If you look on it that way, that you are my witnesses and now I'm going to show inconsistencies. Now I'm going to show bias. Now I'm going to show that you are a money grabber in this particular one. Now I'm going to show that the government is after Sean Combs. So I think that there were a lot of opportunities and they did do a very good job. On the other hand, so did the prosecution. So I think that that's really kind of the takeaway, and that is when we look at these attorneys that were great across the board. That was one of the things that was really spectacular about this. You saw fine attorneys on both sides doing very, very good work. Of course, Sean Combs is in that position to afford an attorney, and not everybody's legal journey is going to look this way. But the defense did do a very good job. During closing, Mark Agnifilo was very interactive, comedic, really kind of brought light to the fact that, you know what, maybe this is, not as big as you think. So we got Astroglide off the streets, right? That's what he said. Big deal. Oh, wow, aren't they great? So he really kind of made light of what this really could translate as when you really break down what he said is just a modern day love story. Some people might laugh at that, but he did connect with the jury in that way. With the same token, so did the prosecution, but the jury made their choice.
Another update from court, the judge asking the defense, are you proposing $1 million bond? Mark Agnifilo says, Diddy's defense attorney, yes, and travel to Florida, New York, and Los Angeles. Then Assistant U.S. Attorney Comey says the U.S. opposes his release. A person found guilty shall be detained until the judicial officer finds he is not likely to flee or be a danger. Comey continues on saying the defendant faces a maximum sentence of 20 years. Even while faced with this case, he assaulted Jane. Here in New York, preparing to surrender, he had drugs in his hotel room, was ready to commit the same offense. The judge then continues on saying, I am not going to resolve this second. I need to review the statutes. Ms. Comey, do you have a case in which bail was denied after a conviction under the Mann Act? You may confer and come back. We'd plan to be here the whole day. So this, we do have more business to attend to, even though this verdict has been read. Let's go back to Sierra Gillespie outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Sierra, what more are you seeing outside the courthouse? And just as you're processing how all of this played out, as someone who covers celebrity for our Law and Crime YouTube channel Scandal, how will people, and time will tell, but how does this impact Diddy's legacy compared to if he came back as guilty for racketeering conspiracy?
Wow, Chris, there's a lot to digest. Again, I am still shocked the fact that we have a verdict after 1 hour of deliberation this morning. And like I said, we're here live on our live stream, ready to go and bring you the latest, as Chris has been doing so eloquently, getting you guys all up to speed. So what's happening is I'm standing here facing the camera with the courthouse behind me. And I swear to you, every time I turn back to look and see, okay, what's going on? Am I going on air? Am I not? Every time I turn back around, there is more people. I'm going to guess 200 people, could be more, that are just surrounding the front of the courthouse there as these arguments about bail are going back and forth. You can feel the vibes here, right? And I think, going to your next question, Chris, about what does this mean for P. Diddy's legacy, overall, I think this is a win for him, especially the fact that at first this is a hung jury when we're talking about racketeering conspiracy. You know, either side, we aren't able to decide. You know, maybe if it ends in a hung jury, there could be a retrial down the line. We don't know. It's still up in the air. But the fact that it's not guilty, they're major win. The fact that it's not guilty on 2 more of the charges, the fact that he is only found guilty on the transportation to engage in prostitution, I think that's a major win for him. And especially in the way that celebrity lives are different than the ordinary people, quote unquote. And I'll call myself an ordinary person. My life is a little bit different than P. Diddy's. But I mean, as far as all of that goes, honestly, they talked about this during the ongoing trial. They talked about how there was another famous rapper who took part in these freak-offs, you know, with the transportation to engage in prostitution, kind of going to that. Now, I'm not saying this person has been charged at all, but what I'm trying to say is that in the celebrity world, this is more acceptable. This is just something that happens. It's not something that people usually get charged for. So honestly, P. Diddy's reputation is not as down in the dumps, I think, as perhaps it maybe once was.
And you think of just how people consume media these days. You can listen to a Diddy song in your headphones on the subway on the way to work, and nobody knows what you're listening to. It's your business whether or not you want to still consume the content that he produces. Do have more updates coming in. The Assistant U.S. Attorney Comey continuing to say, I'm aware of cases. This is as far as whether Sean Combs, what bail, if bail should be set, because he's been found guilty on 2 counts related to the Mann Act, transportation to engage in prostitution. She says, I'm aware of cases involving minors, but we intend to raise relevant conduct at sentencing, the drugs and violence. The judge says, I like the letters from each side. When? A few hours. So we're expecting to hear something related to bail, moving and at least at some point today, potentially. The judge then says, I think that makes sense. Mr. Combs does not want to go back to the MDC, and Mr. Combs is shaking his head. So 1 p.m. letters, and we'll convene in the afternoon. I'll let the parties know when. Mark Agnifilo says he would be a fool, which he is not, to violate any condition. So the judge says for now, they are adjourned. So there you go, adjourned until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when I believe the prosecution and defense will be making some sort of argument about what happens now to Sean Diddy Combs ahead of any potential sentence related to the 2 charges that he was found guilty of, transportation to engage in prostitution. Have a poll, a big poll result, more than 24,000 of you voting on this. Predictions on the verdict. At the time, we had guilty on some counts at 48%. So you were correct. Guilty on all counts, 36%, not guilty at 14%. William, I'm going to bring you back in because I asked Candace just what this defense team did well for Sean Diddy Combs, though he is still convicted on 2 pretty serious charges and could end up going to federal prison. But when you look at this defense team, this all-star cast, what did they do that's just a little bit different than the typical defense attorney that someone might get if they don't have the money that Sean Diddy Combs has?
Well, first of all, what you just said is probably the most important part of it here. I mean, they had next to limitless resources, which unfortunately is not true for the overwhelming majority of people who are charged either federally or on a state level. And so, Sean Combs is in a position to be able to afford not only top-notch attorneys, but everything that comes along with it. Top-notch investigators, people who are willing to pour through and able to pour through hours and hours and hours of videos, to go through thousands upon thousands of text messages. The system doesn't allow for that in most circumstances. So Combs is very lucky and blessed to be able to afford that type of attorney with the resources that go with it. As far as the lawyers themselves go, look, they did a fantastic job here. One of the things that they did during a closing argument was they humanized Sean Combs as much as they could. They did everything they could to take the sting out of that 2016 video that we've all seen 1,000 times now. They were successful in doing that. And in their cross-examination of the government's witnesses, they were able to sort of put on a shadow case. They called no witnesses, but instead they used the government's own witnesses against the government. And that's the key to cross-examination, is when you have these witnesses who are testifying against your client, if you're able to spin it in such a way that they become your witnesses or testify favorably for your client, that's exactly what you want them to do, and that's what they did here. They certainly did that with Cassie Ventura. They did it with Jane. They did it with Mia, and those were obviously the three most important witnesses that the government had, and yet they were able to turn that testimony around and use it to their own advantage. It was brilliant.
Programming update for today, as we are following this coverage live of the verdicts related to Sean Diddy Combs. We'll run through the verdicts once again for you here in just a moment, just in case you're just joining us, trying to figure out what's going on. I can tell you that count one, racketeering conspiracy, that was not guilty. Sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura, not guilty. Sex trafficking of the victim, pseudonym Jane, not guilty, but guilty counts on both related to guilty verdicts on both counts related to transportation to engage in prostitution. And we are breaking down exactly what this means. Court right now has been adjourned until this afternoon as the prosecution and defense are trying to figure out what is going to happen to Sean Combs ahead of any possible sentence that he could face. He's been staying at the Metro Detention Center since his arrest in September of last year. The defense is arguing $1 million bond, let Sean Combs go home, but then the prosecution saying, hey, he was still convicted. He needs to stay in custody ahead of whatever possible sentence, which there could be a sentence that puts Sean Combs in federal prison. So that part of the story is not done just yet, but we're expecting to learn a little more about what could happen ahead of sentencing this afternoon. Another update just coming in here after the judge left the courtroom. From the gallery, there was a loud clapping and cheering as Sean Combs is led back into the holding cell. Candace, I think of yesterday when the partial verdict came back. We put up that sketch, and it was for the first time, at least that I saw in a sketch, that Sean Combs looked concerned. To think of less than 24 hours later, it is this situation that he's in. I keep asking for your reaction because it's just incredible to think when you look back on this case that was a strong one, that many people believed, a strong one by the prosecution. One question I have is why not call more witnesses? He's facing all these civil lawsuits for people saying that he did a lot of the things that Cassie Ventura and Jane accused him of. Why were there not more victims, that could have potentially bolstered the prosecution's case more?
Well, listen, we are going to find more about Gina. I think that is one of the instances where people have a lot of questions. She, for people who know her story, she had a lot to say. We didn't hear from her. We didn't hear from Christina Quorum. We didn't hear from security guards, as I've talked about. He's got a lot of civil lawsuits where some of this information might come out and play out. Why not do it? Just did not work strategically. Why didn't we hear from more prostitutes? I think that fact is that we know that when it comes to the Mann Act, that was the low-hanging fruit and that was proven. But when we look at other witnesses, we have to go on a case-by-case basis. What were their stories? What were the options in terms of, if I'm a prosecuting attorney, do I need to take a chance and have them on that stand? Or have I made my points? And I think that each side did their due diligence to bring the witnesses before the jury, make their case. As the defense did, they said, hey, I'm going to punch holes in these particular witnesses that you're bringing prosecution. And apparently it worked. But I think that one thing that people have to remember is this. when it comes to him getting out, this is a man that was convicted. This is a man that when he came to New York, as William said, he's someone who brought drugs and was set up for a freak off and was going to continue in that same vein. If I were the defense, though, I would say, but that was also a man who was addicted to drugs. This is someone now who is not addicted to drugs. He is also someone now who knows that his fate is a lot more important than he would have ever thought of. And I would make that argument on that side. But I think I'm for the prosecution to say, why would he go anywhere? He was convicted on 2 counts. This is not something that leads to, yes, let's let him walk out today, a free man. I don't think that that would make sense. Terrible precedent.
Another programming update for those of you joining us here on the Law and Crime YouTube stream. Jesse Weber, who has been one of the leading voices in analyzing this case, going back to when Sean Combs was indicted, as all of you know here on Law and Crime. He's going to come on the stream, take over for me at 11:30 this morning Eastern time. So if you have post-verdict questions, be sure to drop them in the chat. We'll get those for Jesse as well as Elizabeth. Very excited to hear just her thoughts, what it was like to be in the courtroom as that verdict was read. And then if there is any sort of news conference, if the attorneys come out, both prosecution and defense, we will bring you those news conferences live. Also, Dan Abrams is going to be joining us at 10:50 to talk a little bit more about this verdict and his reaction, having covered so many high-profile cases throughout his career. William, I have a question coming in here. This is from IA. It's a question. Candace, I'll ask you this question as well. William, I'll start with you. Does this mean that the prosecution didn't pick its witnesses well? It seems they didn't take testimonies and sentenced him based on receipts for prostitution, no?
So, again, whenever there's a verdict, regardless of what the verdict is, hindsight's always 20/20. So we can easily sit here and pick apart what the prosecution did. We can sit here and pick apart what the defense team did. But as Candace said earlier, they both did an outstanding job. Whether or not they should have called other witnesses, some of these other women who are suing Diddy, the fact of the matter is this, is that every one of those witnesses who the prosecution could have called because there were lawsuits going on, the defense team is going to say, this is yet another person who's suing Holmes. This is yet another person who has a financial motive here, because that's where those witnesses would come from. So I think it's easy to sit here and say, yes, they should have called these other witnesses. But again, all those witnesses probably have their own baggage that came along with it. The key, though, is quorum. I am surprised that we didn't hear from KK. Again, we don't know what her situation was in terms of immunity. I don't know if it would have tipped the scales, but if there was one witness who, as I sit here, obviously not being part of the trial, that I probably would have wanted to hear from, it was her. I think she could have helped the government, again, if she was willing to testify on their behalf.
And you're taking a live look outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. You can just see the crowd of people who have gathered in the wake of these verdicts that have come down in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. A live shot there of the front door. His defense wants him to go home today. $1 million bond. We'll see if the judge, what he has to say about that. The prosecution has asked that Sean Combs continue to be held ahead of any sort of sentencing. We don't know when a sentencing date would be, but there's going to be conversation about what happens to Sean Combs after this verdict in the afternoon. Court's been adjourned until 1 o'clock. We're waiting to get our Elizabeth Milner. She's just getting set up right now. So if you do have questions for Elizabeth about what just went down in the courtroom, put those in the chat and we'll ask those questions to her live on the air. Candace, not to simplify what happened, but as we try to analyze all the testimony over 7 weeks and whether this witness was strong or that witness was strong, in cases like this, what does it just come down to? How often does it just come down to these were 12 people that just saw it this way, and if it was 12 other people, they could have seen it another way?
I think that is the most concise, specific, right answer. You don't know these 12 people and how they believed and felt about each of these particular witnesses and crimes. If we go back to the first witness, which was Daniel Phillip, a prostitute, and then
We are looking outside at the courthouse for Diddy. Drop it down in the chat. What do you guys think sentencing will look like? Do you guys think Diddy will receive bail? He is proposing $1 million bail. Okay, what say the sippers on the Diddy verdict that has came down this morning? Acquitted on 3 charges of the most serious ones and convicted of the lesser of the 2 of transpo of a hoe. Okay, transpo of a hoe. Diddy got transpo of a hoe, convicted twice on those 2 charges. Let's listen in.
Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber and welcome to our continued coverage of the Sean Combs criminal case. What a day. The verdict is in. Sean Combs has been acquitted of all charges except 2, transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations. This is a massive win for Sean Combs. There's no other way to say it. When he was facing racketeering conspiracy and up to life in prison, and now, oh, by the way, sex trafficking, a minimum of 15 years in prison, acquitted of those charges, both with respect to Cassie Ventura Fine and Jane, and now has been convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Yes, they are federal crimes. Yes, the prosecution may be even advocating for 20 years in prison. Each one has a maximum of 10 years in prison. They want it to run one after the other. That could be highly unlikely. There is no, our understanding, mandatory minimum for transportation to engage in prostitution. In other words, he is looking at a totally different reality than he was at the beginning of the day. And now we are trying to understand what happens next. There is a consideration today about whether he will be released. Will he be released pending sentencing, which might happen about 70 or 90 days from now? And that will come out today. We're going to get a little bit of logistics about what's happening. And we're also going to try to figure out what the possible sentence could mean and what this verdict means. You have to imagine this is a loss for the prosecution. This is a loss for the Southern District of New York, who compiled a case about him. The accusation was operating a criminal enterprise for years. The jury did not believe it. We have a statement right now that came in from the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jay Clayton, and Special Agent in charge of the New York Field Office of Homeland Security Investigations, Ricky J. Patel, on the verdict. This just came in, quote, "Sex crimes deeply scar victims, and the disturbing reality is that sex crimes are all too present in many aspects of our society. Victims endure gut-wrenching physical and mental abuse, leading to lasting trauma. New Yorkers and all Americans want this scourge stopped and perpetrators brought to justice. Prosecuting sex crimes requires brave victims to come forward and tell their harrowing stories. We and our law enforcement partners recognize the hardships victims endure and have prioritized a victim-centered approach to investigating and prosecuting these cases. Today, we recognize the important work of the SDNY's Civil Rights Unit, as well as the tireless efforts of the women and men at HSI who are devoted to combating human trafficking. We thank the special agents from the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York, Digital Forensic Unit, and the Complex Analytics and Social Media Enhancement Team at the New York, New Jersey High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. We would also like to thank our partners at the NYPD for their assistance in this matter and for sharing our victim-centered approach to combating sex crimes. Nothing necessarily on point about the verdict per se. Interesting. Let me bring in, by the way, so we're going to take your questions as they come in. We're going to try to do extended coverage as we figure out what the rest of the day will look like in terms of when sentencing might be scheduled, in terms of whether or not Sean Combs will be released today. Will we see him? That's a question. That's a consideration. We have with us Law and Crimes Elizabeth Milner, who was in court today, who was in court for all of the action for this trial, and SiriusXM host Mina Sawat-Lone. It's great to have you both here. Elizabeth, I'll start with you. Your reaction to this verdict, and number two, what can we expect for the rest of the day? And you know what? Let me add a number three in there. What was it like inside that courtroom when the verdict came down?
Well, a lot of people were at the edge of their seats when that verdict was about to be read out loud. I was very anxious,
I don't know
even
if we're
sitting
having
in
an
my seat
audio
in the
issue, if we can hear Elizabeth, but I can't hear her on my end. There we go. Now we got Elizabeth. Hey, Elizabeth, you're back with us.
Oh, Okay. I was like, is my mic on? My mic is on, I promise. So I will say this, Jesse, that there was a lot of anticipation while that verdict was about to be read out loud. I think a lot of us who are on the press side of the courtroom were at the edge of our seats waiting to see the jury's reaction whenever they came into the courtroom, but also what their verdicts would be rendered. And obviously we know that to be that he was only found guilty on count 3 and 5, that being transportation to engage in prostitution in relation to Cassie, in relation to Jane, but not guilty on count 1 RICO conspiracy, and not guilty on count 2 and 4, that being sex trafficking, Cassie and Jane. So I think from the family's perspective, from the defense's perspective, and even some people inside that courtroom, I think they were pretty pleased by the outcome of the jury's decision. I did note that there was an audible applause. A lot of people were kind of either doing prayer hands, up to the sky, that type of thing. And that was coming from the family's kind of point of view. And it seemed like they were pretty pleased. And I don't know if you heard, Jesse, when I was talking with Chris earlier, he being Sean Combs, turned around in his defense chair and told his family that he's coming home. So it seems like from his perspective that maybe his defense attorneys told him it's a possibility the judge may let you go today. I didn't think that was at all a possibility, given that he has been found guilty on 2 of the charges. But it seems like from the defense's perspective, they were so pleased with the verdict. Obviously, they would have loved for an acquittal on all counts, but in terms of the guilty counts that were rendered, I think that they were just pretty happy. And according to Mark Agnifilo, now Sean Combs has his life back. In terms of just other people who were inside that courtroom, it seems like, again, people not even just from the Combs family, but other people on the public side were applauding the defense team after the verdict was rendered. There were a lot of hugs inside that courtroom. It was either the family, it was the defense attorneys. I saw, even when the verdict was read out loud, Tenny Garagos and Sean Combs really having kind of a tight squeeze on their hands. There was tears flowing from Brian Steele, from Tenny Garagos, from Ana Maria Esteval, from Mark Agnifilo. And so it seems like the defense, and they did a good job. They didn't put up any witnesses, but they did an excellent job with the cross-examinations, and they were pretty pleased given the jury's decision.
We're getting a lot of questions in about this, Elizabeth. Before we get to them, just real quick, what can we expect for the rest of the day? I understand we might have a development at 1 p.m., or at least we believe those are when papers are going to be submitted in terms of bail, right? In terms of whether or not Sean Combs can be released today. Which, by the way, we are in a very different scenario. When he applied for bail during the course of this trial, during the course of this criminal case, the sex trafficking and the racketeering allegations were hanging over him. So when you talked about, was he a danger to the community? What was he charged with? The seriousness of the offenses, likelihood of fleeing, those considerations were coupled with the charges that he was facing. He no longer faces those charges. These transportation charges, sure, they're federal crimes, but he is in a much better position to argue for release today than he has ever been. What do we expect the schedule is going to be for the rest of the day?
Well, I knew I missed one of your questions, Jesse. So sorry about that.
Nah,
but
no
yeah,
worries.
It seems like so it seems like both parties are working right now to kind of draft up an email or a letter to the judge as far as their arguments as to why Sean Combs should or should not be released on some type of bail condition pending his sentencing. Now, Mark Agnifilo, he stood up and he says that Sean Combs should be released. He should be able to walk out of that courthouse today. Now, right now, he's not at MDC Brooklyn. From my understanding, he's still being held at kind of a holding cell up inside the courthouse. But Mark Agnifilo was pretty adamant. He wants his client to be released on some type of bail condition. He should be able to return to Two Star Island over in Florida. He should have travel limits only to Florida, Los Angeles, where he has another home, and to New York City. If there was any type of questions in regards to him being a very wealthy person and him having access to a private plane, according to Mark Agnifilo, his plane is currently over in Maui. He doesn't even have access to his plane. In terms of just even Sean Combs' passport, Mark Agnifilo said both he and Tenny Garagos have possession of his passport and that they would return it to pretrial services, even proposing that he be released on a $1 million bail, given that he was acquitted on RICO conspiracy and given that he was also acquitted on 2 counts of sex trafficking. And so they said that even the family who was inside that courtroom for the verdict, that they would be able to kind of sign some type of condition to help him be allowed to leave on bail conditions if the judge goes for it. Now, obviously, from the government side, they were saying that the defense is being a little too lenient, given that Sean Combs was still found guilty on 2 charges, but we'll see what those arguments look like when they return later this afternoon.
We're also talking about the reaction to this verdict. I mentioned the statement from the government. Per CNN, Cassie Ventura's lawyer, Douglas Wigdor, told CNN following, again, the Sean Combs being acquitted of sex trafficking and racketeering, found guilty of the Mann Act transportation to engage in prostitution charges. There was a lot of mixed emotions in that courtroom. Obviously, we would have liked to have seen convictions on the RICO charges and the sex trafficking charges, but Cassie prompted this investigation by the Southern District, and now Sean Combs stands before this court as a convicted felon of 2 crimes. To be very clear, he was acquitted with respect to the sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. He was found guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution with respect to Cassie. So Cassie and her testimony did support one of the convictions in this case. Let me bring in Mina Sewat-Lona. Mina, so good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. We have a number of Super Chat questions that are coming in. For example, we have a Super Chat question from JB Dub. Thank you so much. Jesse, man, just want to say thank you for everything, man. Great job covering this. That's so kind. Thank you so much. This is an interesting one we had here from Super Chat. This is from JAM. Thank you so much. How does this verdict impact the civil sexual assault lawsuits that he faces? Mina, you and I both know, different standard of law, right? Different burden of proof. But I do wonder if we see some sort of movement or action as a result of this verdict.
I mean, there's no way to foresee that, but I would say I don't think it's going to change anything. I think that he's going to still have to fight those allegations. And they're lengthy, there's over 80. And in fact, while we were waiting on the deliberations, there was another lawsuit that came in. So I don't think this affects that. And a lot of people sometimes ask, why do people, file civil suits as opposed to something with the government? And this is why sometimes, according to the law, people don't get the justice that they are looking for when it comes to some of these government cases. So then they resort to civil cases as a way to get some kind of payback for what they feel like has happened to them. So I don't think it's going to affect the civil cases.
Yeah, I think that's a different animal. They'll be attacked in a different way. But look, I mean, if you look at OJ, right? There was a criminal case, there was a civil case, different results. But also he's facing allegations in the civil context that have nothing to do with the criminal case. And that's something that's completely different. I want to bring back in Elizabeth on this because, Elizabeth, I know we have to sign you off in a minute. We got this Super Chat question from Shiri B. Thank you so much for this. Love Long Crime. Thank you so much. Jesse and Queen Elizabeth. Did the defense ever bring up a conspiracy theory of the timing of the allegations due to Diddy's lawsuit against Diageo? There was nothing about that in the criminal case, right?
I mean, surprisingly, Jesse, it was brought up just a little bit in relation to one particular witness, and that being Derek Ferguson, this chief financial officer over at Bad Boy, when they kind of mentioned during his cross-examination whether or not Diageo might have played a role in kind of, they were talking about the expansion of Ciroc and how they were only isolated to certain urban areas, and that Derek Ferguson was kind of talking about how the Combs enterprise, not to be confused with the one that the government was alleging, but the Combs enterprise wanted more of an expansion outside of just to be marketed at urban areas. So surprisingly, it was brought up in that particular context. And in that, when I remember reading, or not reading, because obviously I was there, I remember hearing it, and I was like, oh, might be in relation to the Diageo and kind of the civil matter with that. And so it was brought up in court, yes, but as far as just the overall conversation about it, it was really just kind of limited to that.
Yeah, and not the timing of it. There was some insidious reason. Before we let you go, I know I have to wrap up. There's a lot of commotion going on outside, right? What's happening around you?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, honestly, Jesse, if you guys saw me kind of looking around, looking back and forth, it's because literally right behind our tent, somebody was yelling, getting into a very heated debate about, again, the emotions are running pretty high after this verdict came out. A lot of people, especially those who were very much free Diddy, free Sean Combs, those who are kind of in his support system, kind of yelling a little bit at us. I even see some of the comments from you guys, because some of y'all are saying that we're biased, all of those things. And so in terms of just the emotions running kind of high after this verdict is read, it's definitely spilling out over into the courtroom. The yelling kind of stopped for a moment. Not sure if it went kind of over to the other side, but it seems like there is still a lot kind of going on. I'm glad that it kind of calmed down a little bit before you went back to me, but it was kind of a little bit of a commotion going on. I was just kind of nervous for a moment that he might interrupt our live shot, but it doesn't seem like that's happening.
Right.
It seems like, you know, for the most part, I was taken over to the side a little bit over there.
Well, you stay safe. We will talk to you a little bit later, and we'll find out what today is going to have in store for us and whether or not we might actually see Sean Combs exit that courthouse. That would be something. We have not had, we, the public, have not been able to lay eyes on it for quite some time. Elizabeth Milner, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Want to bring on Tyler Bailey into the conversation. Tyler, thanks so much for coming on. It's good to see you. I mean, I'm made of questions, but we also have a ton of questions coming on. We have a lot of questions about this. So JAM has a super chat question. Thank you so much. Must Diddy register as a sex offender? And Martina McGowan, again, has a super chat question. Thank you so much. Is he classified now as a sex offender? So is he classified as a sex offender right now after being convicted? And will he have to be under federal law?
Yeah, that depends on the statute. I don't believe with these charges that he's going to have to register as a sex offender. He'll probably have some terms of any supervised release that he gets that may require, sex addiction counseling or things of that nature. But I don't see with the charges that Mr. Combs has been accused of and the remaining ones that are left of him having to register as a sex offender. This isn't a case involving minors. I'll need to double check the statute, but I don't believe that's going to be a part of his penalty.
Tyler, got a super chat question from Robin Donnellan. Robin, thank you so much. Will Diddy get back all the tapes and other items that the feds took in the raid? It's an interesting question because I wonder if he could put in a request for whatever was taken for property that was seized, but at the same time, he was convicted. And the argument could be that evidence was used to convict him. I mean, what are the chances he could get any of that material actually back?
It's unlikely that he would get that material back. And also unlikely that he would even ask for the material back. And still, he was convicted of 2 charges. He may appeal those 2 convictions that he has left here. So it's still relevant for purpose of the appeal on the record. So I don't see him trying to get it back. And also sometimes, when you win, you get a win, you don't need to overplay your hand like the government did in this case.
We have a super chat question from LC. Thank you so much. I'll throw this to you, Mina. Elizabeth's a star. Did this boil down to closings? She threw paint on a wall and left it for the jury to paint the picture on their own. I'm assuming they're talking about the prosecution. Could have said charge, crime after crime, line by line. Jurors are not painters. Thoughts? Did the prosecution, I guess the question, were they too broad? Did they just give too much for the jury to consider? Was it, a little too, too much when you look at all the underlying predicate crimes of kidnapping, arson, forced labor, sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution? I know they were trying to set up a criminal enterprise, but was it too much, Mina?
Well, I think there's a lot of nuances in the law. I mean, even me just being on air, having to explain to my audience, what are predicate acts and what do they need in order to get the guilty on the RICO. I think it was very law heavy and it might have been confusing for the jury. I also think the defense did an awesome job of discrediting some of the witnesses. They presented extensive text messages that were loving from Jane Doe and Cassie and even Mia, after she claims that she was raped and all these horrible things happened to her. Mia continued to praise him on social media. And and in the case of Cassie and Jane Doe, they continued those relationships despite them testifying that they had been victimized in some way. So I think the defense did an awesome job of disproving and discrediting some of the witnesses here. And I think that's what we're seeing. All you need is a little modicum of reasonable doubt. And clearly that was there because we see how the jury decided this case.
Look, I came on air yesterday and I gave my prediction. I said, based on the juror notes, It seemed to me you couldn't have jurors who were voting in favor of racketeering. There was a split there. And them not have already convicted him of something else. There's no way they could say we're thinking about convicting him of racketeering and he's completely acquitted across the board and everything else. The easiest, I've said this from the beginning, the easiest convictions for the prosecution were transportation to engage in prostitution based on the phone records, text messages, travel receipts, testimony. It was there. It was there. What was more up in the air was sex trafficking. And I thought because the jurors did not even ask for a readback of testimony with respect to Jane, and because of already some of the grayer parts of her testimony, it was likely that they were going to find him not guilty with respect to sex trafficking of Jane. Where the one that was a toss-up was sex trafficking of Cassie. I thought because of the readouts of the testimony yesterday of the key alleged moments of alleged sex trafficking, right, when they talk about 2016, the attack, when they talk about the plane incident, when they talk about Daniel Phillips' testimony, I thought that was the jury reading that back, coming back with a verdict shortly thereafter that they might convict him on sex trafficking. They did not. Maybe there was a debate about, let's just look at this one final time, and they were not convinced. Racketeering was up in the air always, and it did become a question even after a modified Allen charge from the judge. Would they come back and say, we still can't come to a decision? Would they say, nope, actually we find him guilty? Here they found him not guilty. I want to bring in Sierra Gillespie, law and crimes reporter who's been on the ground, who's been doing excellent coverage, the host of Scandal. Hope everybody can check it out on YouTube as well. It's a great show. Couple of things that we have coming in here, super chat questions. So first of all, Maria Jimenez says, no question, this person is just showing support. Thank you so much, Maria. That's so kind of you. But this is an important question we have coming in, and I want you to answer it, Sierra. Pizza asks, and thank you for the super chat question, Pizza. This is a spit in the faces of victims everywhere. This is why victims don't come forward. What's your reaction to that?
I think it's an emotional reaction for a lot of people, right? And we've talked about this throughout the case, the fact that this witness testimony was so intimate, so personal, going through some of their own trauma that they had to do, number one, in front of a crowd, number two, in front of their alleged abuser, is hard, right? Okay, so we have that really intense stuff they're talking about. And yet, unfortunately, most of us know someone who's been affected by sexual abuse in some way, separating it from the case altogether, you know? And so I think that's really why this case has struck a chord with so many people. If we're setting aside P. Diddy and his celebrity status, which is interesting, yes, but if we focus on the sex trafficking allegations, almost everyone unfortunately knows someone who was the victim of sexual assault, if not themselves. And so, of course, it's going to be emotional to have a result like this, not guilty in regards to Jane and Cassie and the sex trafficking. Honestly, I heard what you were saying, Jesse, before you called me up, and I tend to agree with you. I thought, Jane, I could see that being not guilty, but with Cassie, that's not at all what I was expecting. And I don't know if I can say exactly what our viewer said about this being a spit-in-the-face situation, but I do think, I mean, maybe it's true. If we're believing what the government had to say in some of their statements, they were saying this could deter other victims in other cases unrelated to P. Diddy from coming forward. This is very important. A lot of cases rely or hinder on the testimony from these witnesses or alleged survivors and abusers because sometimes it takes a while to come forward. Sometimes there's no longer that DNA or it happened way back when if we're talking a civil suit. So I do think it's a statement at the very least.
Sarah, what is going on around you? I understand people are quite tense. Who's around you? What are they saying? What is happening right now after the verdict?
It is tense here, Jesse. It very much so is. I mean, just seconds ago, before I came on air, there were people live streaming, literally screaming at each other. So much so that I was like, okay, am I safe here? Which is what we are all evaluating all the time, making sure that we're okay and safe. Because people are legitimately screaming, yelling at each other about differing opinions. Some people are so pro-Diddy. How could you have in the past said something so bad about P. Diddy? You reported that. How could you? Other people who are literally smoking cigars and saying this is a victory because he'll at least spend some time behind bars, according to these people. And behind me, I don't know if you can see it as much now, There were so many people here, I'm going to guess around 200, it could have been growing, that the crowd was kind of falling into the streets. I went across the street and kind of wanted to see what the vibe was over there. Again, very tense. And New York police officers were there saying, get back, because this is an active street, by the way. You've seen the sirens and heard the horns. Like, people are driving up and down this road, and it's unsafe to be walking in the middle of the street. So just probably 5 minutes ago, an NYPD giant van with barricades came, and they were going and putting them farther across the courthouse there so that people can't spill out over into the road for their safety, and also, honestly, possibly because the crowd has gotten so wily and so rowdy, and we just don't know what's going to happen. So there is a pretty decent sized police presence here too.
We have reporting from NBC to couple this that say men outside the courtroom screaming over their opposing views on Combs' verdict, as Sierra was saying. Apparently there is one man who's been reported to be wearing a denim jacket, sunglasses, questioning another man in a red shirt and a bucket hat over whether Combs is going to prison. The man in the denim had yelled, he beat her. The other man said it doesn't matter. The other man says he beat her, he kicked her. The other one says, and she liked it. How about that? This is a verdict, Sierra, because essentially, let's be entirely clear. The jury was not convinced that Cassie or Jane were victims of sex trafficking, that Sean Combs did not use force, fraud, or coercion to induce them into commercial sex acts. They believe that they were transported across state lines for the purposes of prostitution. That is a very different legal conclusion than sex trafficking. And you wonder, you respect the jury's verdict, you understand the jury's verdict. I have no reason to question the jury's verdict. This seemed to be a very methodical jury, took their position, their role very seriously, but you can see how people are now going to interpret this in different ways.
Oh, yeah, and that description that you just made, the man who was wearing the red bucket hat and then the denim jacket, that was literally right behind me. Where the camera is, right behind the camera is where that was happening. And it was tense, and you do see this, Jesse. I mean, it's opposing views. Some people who say that they are advocates for people who are sexual assault survivors, who are saying one thing, and other people who are saying they are advocates for P. Diddy, he's wrongly accused, saying another thing. So there's a lot happening.
Yeah. Tyler, I want to go to you real quick. We got a super chat question that came in. Keon Roper, I'm so sorry. Pronunciation's not my strong suit. But thank you for the super chat question. Could Diddy have a civil suit? Could he sue the government misconduct for Breonna Bogolin's perjured testimony, overcharging with RICO? Because RICO seems like a clear overcharge. Can he sue the government now?
He could sue the government. He would likely be unsuccessful in suing the government. I think the government had probable cause for the charges that they accused Mr. Combs of committing, but they were not able to prove some of those charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Generally, there could be, malicious prosecution or a false arrest or false imprisonment case when somebody is arrested without probable cause. But here, based off the evidence that we've seen over 7 weeks of trial, there was clearly enough probable cause for the arrest. But the jury felt differently, that he was not guilty of mainly the RICO charge and along with the sex trafficking charges.
Okay, so here at almost noon, we are getting a report that Sean Combs' family is entering that courthouse once again. This day is not over. We are going to see whether or not Sean Combs will be released. Will we see him on the outside? Will he walk out of that federal courthouse? It's going to be up to the judge. Both sides are petitioning one way or another. The prosecution wants him locked up. The defense wants him freed. There is an advantage in the defense's camp right now after him being acquitted of racketeering and racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking. We're going to take a break. We will continue with more live coverage here on Law and Crime.
All right, as you guys see, everybody's gathering around outside in support or non-support of Diddy getting bail. People are wanting to see him stay, and people are wanting to see him get granted bail. Camera crews and everything, news reporters, everybody vlogging. Okay, everybody vlogging, cameras up everywhere, phones, tripods. What are the sippers? sippers thing. We've been sipping this morning. The tea has dropped on Diddy. Diddy is acquitted and convicted at the same damn time, y'all. He got acquitted on 3 of the charges, most serious ones, and then he got convicted on the transpo of a hoe. Okay, he got convicted of transpo of a hoe twice. Okay, so those are mandatory sentencings, could go up to 10 years apiece. He's got 2, which could be 20, but we also read the, things that could come into play for Diddy, being that Diddy's a non-offender, things like that, no prior criminal record, blah, blah, blah. Okay, what that could look like for Diddy could get bail. Diddy could get 2 years on each, up to 2 years on each charge, meaning he would already have served almost a year, do a year, be out. Okay, so yeah, what say sippers? Drop it down in the chat. What do you think? He will get bail or not? Do you think Diddy will return to court if he gets bail for his sentencing? Okay, Law and Crime are on a break. Oh, they came back up here for a few. Let's tap in and listen.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome back to our continued live coverage of the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Big day here today in the Southern District of New York, in the federal courthouse, out in downtown New York. A verdict has been reached. We've been reporting about it all morning. A verdict has been reached in the case. Sean Combs acquitted of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion for both Cassie Ventura Fine and Jane, but ultimately he has been convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations. And today is, you would think that would be the end of the day. It is certainly not. Why? The judge has to determine whether or not Sean Combs should make bail, whether or not he should be released, whether or not, and we have a live shot of the courthouse, whether or not we will see him walk out of that courthouse later today. Right now, both sides are submitting paperwork to the court. We're keeping a very careful eye on the courtroom updates to see what that decision will be, because the judge is going to decide. And what the basis was for Sean Combs to be locked up during the whole course of this criminal process, it is very different now. It is very different now because he's not facing those top charges, those violent charges, those charges that could have sent him to prison for the rest of his life. And one of the other big considerations we have when we talk about transportation to engage in prostitution, the charges that he was convicted of, is what will be his sentence. While there are maximums of 10 years in prison on each charge, and although the prosecution has said that he could face up to 20 years if they stack them one after the other, it seems highly unlikely given a number of mitigating factors in this case, but there's also aggravating factors, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But we're going to take your questions as we are live on air, and we update you about what is happening. But I also have with us a very special series of guests. So we have an all-star panel. We got with us Ben Shue, acclaimed litigator, famously represented Johnny Depp in his high-profile trial against Amber Heard. We also have with us criminal defense attorney and civil rights attorney Tyler Bailey. We have with us Sierra Gillespie and Elizabeth Milner out in the field. We'll get to them. But right now, we are also joined by Sheree Hayes. Now, for anybody who's been following this case, you will know who Mr. Hayes is, also referred to as the Punisher during the course of this case. Mr. Hayes, who's also, by the way, the author of In Search of Freezer Meat, we can talk more about that. Hayes had testified during the course of this trial about his involvement in 8 to 12 sexual encounters that he had with Cassie Ventura Fine and Sean Combs. Testified that Combs watched and gave directions during these events. You played a pivotal role in this case, Mr. Hayes. It's great to see you. Thanks for taking the time. Your reaction to the verdict?
I honestly thought the verdict was the correct decision. It may be not based on following the specifics of the law, because I know the prosecutor said you only had to find one instance where you believe there's coercion. But if you're talking about a jury and the understanding that this was relationships, these were his partners, these were, they were exchanged text messages of love and care and over long periods of time. And then also a bunch of consenting also messages to the sexual activity and the type of lifestyle they lived. I thought it was going to be hard for a typical person that wasn't going to really streamline the law, extremely hypervigilant, to not see this as a relationship domestic issue opposed to sex trafficking. So this is actually what I expected.
To be clear, in any of your encounters, did you see any force, fraud, coercion being used to induce Cassie to engage in these sex acts?
Yeah, it's similar to my testimony. I did not, and so what I will even add is, I testified, and the facts were I only interacted and spoke to Cassie during any of these occasions. I never had any communication with Mr. Combs. So I would be greeted in a personable one-on-one situation prior to the activities, and then again at the conclusion. And I always found good vibes, good energies. Hey, thanks for coming. It was great. We'll see you again. Here you go. And I did not even witness anything that appeared to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs or anything. So I did find it difficult to see my interaction being anything close to criminal.
I want to tell you what's happening outside the courthouse. CNN is reporting that people are quite excited. There are people who are gathered. They are spraying baby oil into the crowd. There are remnants of oil that could be seen on the courthouse pavement. We were reporting earlier on today that there was a verbal dispute between supporters of Sean Combs, or at least supporters of his case, and those who feel differently. When you're seeing a reaction like that outside of the courthouse, you playing a role in this case, what's your position on it? What is your view on it?
So what I think is there's a benefit of the misinformation. You know, me as a civilian, even before I was involved, before I became a witness, the social understanding of this case, they made it so much bigger than what it was. You had rumors of child trafficking. You had all of this bribery and celebrities involved and all of this crazy stuff that escalated to this belief that you was going to get this magnitude of just terrible acts, and not downplaying the domestic violence part of it. But I think when the actual facts of the case became evident, I think people's expectation and their belief that it was going to be so much more, it actually minimized the victims' experiences. So now where there are still people that are victimized, regardless of the verdict, there's still bad experiences. People almost see it as a celebratory, simple scenario because everybody thought it was going to be so much worse than what it was, including myself.
Do you think,
listening to the banter?
Do you think that your testimony helped secure the conviction for transportation to engage in prostitution? Because let's be clear, the two charges that he was convicted of, one was with respect to Cassie, and the other was with respect to Jane. Do you think your testimony helped secure the conviction against Sean Combs?
No, not at all. Not my testimony, because I was clear that my dealings with them was, I'm from New York City at the time, and I only dealt with them in a New York City area. And me being hired in the initial communications was as a male dancer. We always show up on our own. But I did hear in the testimony, there was evidence of plane tickets and stuff being purchased on his American Express card for some of the other escorts. So I'm assuming that secured the conviction for those charges.
Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned to you before we were coming on, we have amazing viewers who submit incredible questions. And I have a bunch of them that a lot of people have questions for you, Mr. Hayes. So let's get right into it. All right, first question. We got a question from Jackie Reed. Did you have any direct dealings with Christina Coram or any other person other than Diddy that helped set up his freak-offs?
Actually, no. And actually, I didn't have any direct dealings with Diddy. All of my communications were specifically with Miss Ventura and Miss Ventura only. There was no conversation, no communication, no anything with Mr. Combs. And I said this before, the first time I actually even had eye contact him, for the first time, eye contact was leaving the stand after my testimony. I had zero interactions with Mr. Combs.
And by the way, I'm just going to let you know, I'm not like tweaking these questions. These are the ones that are coming in, so I'm just going to read them to you. This is from an accused. This is from an account, Smarty Pants. Thank you so much for the super chat question. Do you think Diddy was cheap with you?
Well, listen, if I'm being honest, when I hear some of the other guys getting $5,000, $6,000, obviously that would be the first thing you think. But then I don't know the scenario. I was never there more than 4 hours at a time on the average. And one thing that I will say is I came multiple days in a row. So I don't know what the criteria was to determine what my fee would be, but I was fine with it. I don't have any reservations as if I was not fairly compensated,
We've got a question. Where is this? Okay. Show and Tell Knitting asks, how will the results of this trial affect your interactions with clients like Diddy? Will you do anything differently in the future?
As far as I'm concerned, I would not do anything differently. That was a nuanced situation for me. Obviously, I'm a male dancer. My trade on a regular basis is not sex work to that degree. That was a proposition I indulged in. So I don't really see much changing. This was a very nuanced situation. I don't think anybody predicted these scenarios escalating to what it actually became.
So this is one of the ex-workers that testified against Diddy, everybody, okay? He is one of the guys that helped get Diddy convicted on the transportation of a hoe. Okay, this is one of the guys, I think they called him the Punisher, that testified on the stand about Diddy, saying that, yes, he was engaged in transportation of himself with Diddy and Cassie and his involvement in his role. So let's listen to the Punisher now speak on Law and Crime on his involvement and how he feels about the conviction and acquittal of Diddy. Thanks for sipping tea with Tanisha Talks Teas. Y'all keep on sipping. Drop those teacups in the chat. Let me know what y'all think about Diddy's ass, okay? Convicted and acquitted at the same damn time.
I don't have any full regrets of my interactions, or if I'm being honest, even my decision. It was something I was a part of. It were some of our decisions, and I'm comfortable with the way everything transpired, even the negatives.
Chris Bono asks, how has this experience changed you, if at all?
Well, it put me in a scenario where I have to do damage control, right? We live in a society where you meet a person, everybody Googles you, right? So I know for the rest of my life, I'm associated with this crime and or trial, I should say, with this trial and these accusations, and I'm instrumental in it too. So all I'm doing now.
One also has to wonder, tea sippers, do you think the Punisher should be afraid for his life? Do you think now that Diddy will be acquitted on most charges and likely to receive a less of a charge, of a sentencing, do you think the Punisher should be afraid for his life? Drop that down in the chat.
Now I have to have a much conscious effort in how I'm perceived in my interactions with people going forward, because I could start out in a lot of situations in a negative opposed to what normal people do.
And I appreciate you coming on and speaking to media outlets about this, because obviously the trial wasn't testified. There was reporting, it wasn't televised, excuse me, but it wasn't, there was reporting about what the testimony was like. People might have misconceptions about what you said, why you testified. So to be able to clear the air is really important, which is why we get a question from Brooklyn Truth. What was your motivation for testifying? So to be clear, I mean, did you want to testify? Did you reach out to the government? How did that work exactly?
So I did not want to testify. The government contacted me even way before the charges, just investigators. And I actually believed that my testimony was going to be insignificant. I explained to them I didn't see any violence. I didn't see anything that was out of the ordinary. And then I was aware, I was a resident of New York. We met up in New York. So it didn't really, in my opinion, or my understanding, constitute sex trafficking. So
I mean, we're not even going to hold you guys here, sippers. He has done lots of interviews all across the board about this after he testified. Nobody really knew beforehand, aside for Cassie and Diddy, who the Punisher was in that sense of him being connected to Diddy and Cassie, right? He alluded to Cassie and Diddy in a book. However, he did not mention them in the book. He speaks of that in interviews. So, I mean, he's, gained some clout off of testifying against Diddy, even though he's saying that the government essentially made him do it, okay?
Put me in this situation, and this never happened. I didn't get any issues from the prosecution or the federal government. But if you talk to people who's supposed to be in the know, they scare you about the Southern District. They give you this thing where, look, you want to cooperate, just do whatever you got to do. You don't want to get on their bad side. So I went into the scenario like, look, I'm just going to cooperate to the best of my ability because I don't want to create a scenario where I'm looked at as an issue and then it escalates to something. It probably wouldn't have, but I just kept getting negative feedback that the Southern District is people you don't want to mess around with. And if they want to talk to you, if they want facts, if they want information, you have to give it to them. And that escalated to me on the stand where I never second guessed even, cooperating because I did have worry that resistance could have been an issue for me.
Got maybe the most important question of the day from Xenu Golf Club. Did you like your courtroom sketches?
So I'm still getting problems from my buddies about how terrible those sketches are. So I did not like the courtroom sketches, man.
Well, Combs didn't like them either. He thought he looked like a koala. So.
Yeah. They have me. They're calling me like I don't know if you're familiar with the Fantastic Four, but I'm Ben Grimm.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So yeah, a lot of jokes, a lot of unnecessary jokes I'm subjected to because of those photos.
Got a question coming in from, wait, I just lost it. Where was it? Wait. I think no. Oh yeah. Chris Buono asks, if you weren't an escort worker, in what line of business could you see yourself?
Ironically, I have a passion for car sales. I could see myself being in a decent dealership, maybe a Mercedes, BMW dealership. I like the interaction with people. That would have been somewhere I would have went into as a secondary option.
Let me ask you a question. When you were testifying, this is my question. When you were testifying, what was it like to be in the room with Sean Combs, to see him? Did you make eye contact with him? Was he looking at you? Did it feel awkward? Was it strange?
Listen, man, it was the actual extreme of all of those feelings. I think the federal court is set up to intimidate you. The magnitude of the room, it's like the doors are 15 feet high, the ceiling's 30 feet high. The furniture's huge. You're sitting up high. The judge is high. It's freezing in the room. I walked in and I had literally an anxiety attack. And I consider myself a very calm, cool, collected guy, not easily rattled at all. And by the time I got on the witness stand, I was trembling. And so then to put on top of the understanding that I'm walking in there as the prosecution's witness, so I'm going to assume there's not a favorable thought process with Mr. Combs, his family, anybody involved. So it was very nerve-wracking, man. And I only benefited because I got called to the stand 10 minutes before lunch. And literally just swearing in and answering my name and very preliminary questions, I was losing my voice. I was having trouble talking. And so I'm happy that it broke for lunch. And it took me 20 or the 30-minute lunch to recompose myself. Or I might have had a very different testimony if I didn't have that break time to just kind of get myself together, because it was overwhelming.
Let me, Sheree, stand by. We have more questions coming in, but I want to bring on the other panelists as well. Ben, we haven't had a chance to talk about the verdict. This is something you predicted, though.
Well, I don't know. I went back and forth, but it was, I have to confess, it was a bit of a surprise to me.
Was it something about Cassie's testimony? Was it something about Jane's testimony with respect to sex trafficking? Again, the jury did not believe the prosecution proved beyond a reasonable doubt that they were victims of sex trafficking. What was it? What was the thing that you might have been a hang-up?
I thought it was some of the communications, the text messages, which really suggested more of a relationship rather than coercion. That this is, I think it came across as a very, very complicated, unusual relationship, but a relationship.
Yeah. We got super chat questions coming in for you, Ben. So this is from Nancy Nicole. Actually, this is a regular question. Then we'll go to, actually, let me start with a super chat question. Super chat question from JAM. Thank you so much, Ben. Can law address the need for cognitive consent that has often comprised sex crimes when, I'm not sure what this means, when something's normalized? But yeah, can the law address the need for cognitive consent that is often compromised in sex crimes? I'm not exactly sure the question, but I throw it to you.
No, it's a very good question. And I don't think really this is something that the law can really define. And that's why I think the jury system is really the best way of obtaining the truth when you're talking about complex human emotions. It's really hard to have bright lines in the law. I think it's something that a jury has to consider. And I think this really is the best way to adjudicate these things.
Tyler, Nikki Vale says, do you think if Christina Coram, this is a super chat question, thank you so much. Do you think if Christina Coram testified, the jury would have reached a different verdict?
I think that if she testified as a part of conspiracy, it may have helped the jury get to a conclusion more likely to convict on count number one. But I think as a whole that this jury probably wrestled with the fact that they did not believe this was a conspiracy, a one-man conspiracy with Mr. Combs at the top, and there being no co-conspirators, and then all of the acts of furtherance of this conspiracy led to prostitution, sex trafficking with the two victims. I think they really wrestled and not feel like it was enough. But with KK testifying, possibly it could have helped the prosecution out a little more in convincing the jury.
Ben, got a super chat question from Christina Lester. She writes, I have to know this. Please ask Ben, is he related to Benjamin Chew, prominent Pennsylvania lawyer and jurist and a close friend of George Washington, 1722 to 1810? The people must know.
You have a wonderful viewership and someone who is very keen on history. Yes, that is my ancestor, who was the last crown-appointed chief judge of Pennsylvania. And anybody who is a history buff like your viewer can go see the museum that's in Germantown called Cliveden. And that was Benjamin Chew's house, and it was the site of the Battle of Germantown.
That is awesome. That is amazing. And you had no choice but to become a lawyer. You couldn't be in sales like Mr. Hayes. You couldn't do it. Nope, you couldn't be in that. Nope, you had to be a lawyer. I completely understand. Okay, let me go. Let me go to you, Tyler, on this. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. Super chat question. Is it curious how a deadlocked jury yesterday could come to a unanimous decision with only the hour the next day? I mean, that is interesting, right? They were deadlocked at the end of the day. They basically said they couldn't, they're unpersuadable, right? Unpersuadable views on both sides. They come back in an hour and find him not guilty of racketeering. Can you explain that?
It's amazing what a good night's sleep could do. They clearly not reached that verdict yesterday. They went home. They were told not to discuss this matter, but they slept on it, and they probably were fresh-eyed and ready to go that morning. And I'm pretty sure the foreman said, okay, y'all, we slept on it. Where are we at? And they quickly got to a verdict today. And that's exactly what I think happened.
We have Sierra Gillespie with us, too, out in the field. Sierra, good to see you. First, let us know how crazy it is out there in terms of have you seen more baby oil being sprayed? That's part one. Part two, we have a super chat question from Free. Free, thank you so much. I just don't understand why sex trafficking of Cassie even needed to be proven when we had video evidence of her being beaten and dragged back into the room. That seems like a flaw in our system. So first, What's the scene like? And really the basis of this question is, wasn't sex trafficking of Cassie proven by the 2016 tape?
Wow, these are both really good questions. I'll start with the former first. Is there baby oil present? Confirmed. Yes, there is. Across the street from me at the courthouse, there was in fact baby oil being sprayed over there. And let me tell you, there are literally hundreds of people here. So much so that the NYPD has come and barricaded me into this area I'm in right now across the street with my camera. I got my lights and I'm stuck here basically. Then across the street at the courthouse, Elizabeth Milner is seemingly stuck inside because they have barricaded everyone kind of over there because honestly it was getting dangerous. A lot of people were getting rowdy, people were spilling over into the street, and this is still a road where people are driving, so it's dangerous for people to be standing in the street, right? So, I mean, it is pretty intense here. There's been cheering. There's kind of been a sense that maybe, just maybe, something wild could happen in this bail hearing, and P. Diddy himself could stroll out of this courthouse behind me at any moment. We'll see what's going to happen there. So TBD, and of course, we're going to give you updates on that, number one. Number two, talking about the Intercontinental video, the really harrowing video that many of us have seen back when it was leaked in May of 2024. And now, of course, jurors saw it time and again. This is a question mark. How was Diddy found not guilty in terms of sex trafficking with Cassandra Ventura when we have that video? To which I say, I don't know exactly what the jurors were thinking. I don't know what's on their mind, and we're working to hear from some jurors. I hope to one day have them on my show Scandal, or perhaps Jesse on Sidebar with you, so we can really have a sense of what they were talking about in the deliberation room. But as far as the Intercontinental video, yes, it does show domestic violence. We've heard that from Diddy's team. We heard it from Teni Yaragos in the openings. We heard it from Diddy himself when he came forward with that video, you know, in which he kind of held up his phone. He had a lot of headroom and he apologized for it. So he straight up admitted it. Yes, it was domestic violence. However, domestic violence and sex trafficking are two completely different things. The government said that this showed retaliation. Cassie was leaving a freak off, and then that's what happened, that he physically assaulted her because she wanted to leave. And I guess the jurors just didn't believe that argument, and that's why they found Diddy not guilty on that particular charge.
So we have more. Thank you so much for that, Sierra. We want to go back to Sheree. I have a couple of questions here for you. So first of all, Tracy Roberts, super chat question. This is just a supporter. Thank you so much. That's so kind. Cleveland Thomas asked a super chat question, and I think it's really interesting. From the testimony, Cassie sometimes paid the escorts. Could she have gotten convicted on the Mann Act as well? And I'll answer that, but this is an interesting part. Are the escorts the ultimate victims? Now, from a legal point of view, this was about Jane and Cassie being the alleged victims. The escorts not necessarily for the purposes of these charges. Having said that, through the course of this, when you think about what was alleged, when you think about what was put forward in this case by the prosecution, do you feel, Sheree, do you feel that you are a victim in any of this?
The only part of it I would make me feel victimized, and if this was confirmed, is if my participation did come under a space where Ms. Ventura was under duress, where I just unknowingly did not know that she was being forced in some way, and really giving me a really transparent, acting job of, hey, I'm fine with all of this, but deep down inside, it was a scenario where she was being abused and in pure true distress with my interaction. If I unknowingly was put in that scenario to take advantage of a woman unknowingly, and that is outwardly confirmed in my specific participation, then I would feel like a victim.
I understand. I'm curious if the other people that were part of these sexual events would feel the same. Ben, go to you. You think Sean Combs is going to be released? Do you think today the judge is going to say, hey, listen, the game's changed. Whatever factors were working for the prosecution months ago, the game's changed. He should be released. What do you think?
I have an instinct that he won't be. I don't think so.
Tyler?
I think he should be released. I think that, bonds are all about what could reasonably ensure that the defendant's not going to flee. And here, the max penalty is 10 years per charge. More than likely, the judge is not going to impose a max, and they're not going to run consecutively. So I think a reasonable bond of $1 million would ensure that he's going to come back and do his sentence. And the fact of the matter is, the government has brought a heavy case against Mr. Combs. Most of those charges have been dismissed now because he's been found not guilty. The remaining two, the question that should be asked is, would he have received a bond if these were the only two charges he was accused of at the time he was indicted? And I think the answer is yes, he would have. It would probably been high, and Mr. Combs could put up a high bond in this case.
Ben, Papa Sear asks, thank you so much for the super chat question, Papa Sear. Do you think the $20 million alleged settlement with him, still paying $10,000 a month in rent for another victim, do you think that swayed the jury? We are in a recession. So basically, right, the settlement that Cassie had with Sean Combs, the idea that Jane was still getting her rent being paid for, I think her lawyer was still being paid by Sean Combs. Do you think that that affected the jury's decision?
It's a great question, and I think it could have. I think any number of factors, could have entered into the decision. So it's a good question, and I think absolutely it could have affected some of the jurors.
This is, wow, okay. This is from Sean Love Combs. Okay, this is the account Sean Love Combs. Tyler, super chat question. Thank you, Mr. Combs. Is it possible that if Diddy is released, he will be able to leave America, or would he be able to retrieve his items, the baby oil, the Astroglide? So multiple questions there, Tyler.
Yeah, I think Mr. Combs could afford to buy some more baby oil and Astroglide. There's no way he's going to leave the country. That would be a clear violation of any terms of bond. I'm pretty sure he's already had surrendered his passport. No commercial airline or TSA would not allow him to get on a flight. It's clear that he would not pass the security clearance for it. So no way unless he tried to sneak out the country somehow. And that would be pretty insane for Mr. Combs to do that, knowing his ties here, his family here, the asset he has here, and a relatively low chance of him going to jail for a very long time.
Ben, this is a super chat question from JAM. Thank you so much. May more clinical expert testimony be used in future sexual assault and RICO trials? Trauma and coercion cause prolonged fear. Young witnesses won't come forward now.
Yeah, I think it will continue to be used. I don't think it was particularly effective here. So I think it's a matter of how good the expert is and how effectively she portrays her information.
Ben Shu, Tyler Bailey, Sheree Hayes, thank you all so much for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time. We are going to continue our coverage here in the sense that Sierra Gillespie is outside the federal courthouse. If there is an update, if there is a significant update in what is going to happen with Sean Combs today, if he is going to be granted release, we will cover it. She will jump on air, talk about what's happening. If we see Sean Combs leave that courthouse, we will cover it. Thank you so much for the terrific, terrific questions. Appreciate all of you. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. We'll see what happens next in what is a very eventful day in the Sean Combs criminal case.
All right, we are covering the Sean Diddy Combs. Let's jump on over to some more tea on Sean Diddy. What do y'all think? Do y'all think he will get bail? Drop that down in the chat. Let me know what y'all think. This is y'all one-stop shop for all live updates on everything hot and piping, all of the tea.
Legally, but I thought that RICO charge is hard to prove. So why would the prosecution even go there?
You know, it's always an interesting thing. The prosecution and the statement just issued by the attorney for Cassie Ventura. And when you think about the civil side of this, Cassie Ventura was paid 10 years. Kimberly Richardson joining us, Eyewitness News. Kimberly Richardson joining us with more information. Kimberly.
Yes, and speaking of whether Sean Combs walks out of this courtroom today in the next couple of hours, the judge just did say he will decide whether Combs gets released today. He said the decision may take some time, including giving the lawyers time to write letters arguing for and against his release, but it will happen some.
So right now, all we're waiting on is for the judge to receive the letters back from the family, friends, and everyone like that, right? For Diddy on release of him from custody to await sentencing. Who do you think will write testimonies for Sean? Do you think it'll be his mother, his children? Because nobody, and I mean nobody buddy, showed up for Sean Puffy Diddy Combs, love, whatever you want to call him these days. You can call him now a convicted 2-time felon of transpo of a hoe. Okay, so that's all we're waiting. Let's continue to sip this tea. As you come in, remember to drop your teacups down in the chat, like and subscribe. And welcome to being a tea sipper on Tanisha Talks Tea's channel.
Time today, prosecutors asked for, quote, a few hours. The government says it plans to, quote, look for significant incarceration for Combs. Remember, he's been in since he was arrested. He did not. He tried several times to apply for bail. Those packages were shot down. He turned down a plea deal. So he's been at MDC over in Brooklyn for several months now. Whether he walks out of this courtroom this morning, if he does, sometime today, that will be a scene. As we all know, Sean Combs is not shy. He is a showman. Members of the public still adore him. Many of them are here today. So when he walks out of this courtroom, that will be a moment in this whole saga. Along with him, who's been here every day, just a few family members, his 3 sons, his 3 daughters, his mom, other relatives, they will be behind him, no doubt, claiming victory and showing that. So we shall see. It will be a very interesting moment if and when today, if Sean Combs walks out of this courthouse. Back to you guys.
Just to wrap up exactly what you said into tight sentences, the judge has just said that it is possible that he will make a decision today, that Sean Combs, who has been in prison since September, may walk through those doors today?
I know, right? Yes, the judge again saying he wants to give the lawyers some time to write letters and to argue for and against his release. But yes, prosecutors asked for a few hours to do that.
We're going to go to you in a second, but again, lawyers have until 1 o'clock to file those letters releasing Combs. This is new information just into our newsroom as we speak. When the judge mentioned Combs not wanting to go to MDC, Combs, they said, vigorously shook his head and made prayer hands at the judge. The judge then told Combs that you're going to have to cool your heels in the courthouse for a while. Again, 1 o'clock, lawyers have to file their letters as to why he should and should not be released. And when you hear that, 1 o'clock, is that enough time? I mean, it seems like several hours.
This is a standard argument, and you either have the aggravating factors that the prosecution is going to be looking for, or you don't. Here is where this judge has cut it down the middle, and he is fair. Regardless of Sean Combs' celebrity status or not, the judge is going to go according to the letter of the law. And I do not see the aggravating factors that are going to require him to keep him imprisoned at this time.
It's interesting you say that, because his defense attorney did plead to the judge for the release, arguing to prosecutors, saying that prosecutors are overplaying the allegations. That's the exact term that they use. Overplaying. He is going to have his life back, is what his attorney said. He treasures the opportunity he has been given. So those are the exact words from his defense attorneys. So you agree with the attorney?
I agree. I think that this has been overreaching from the beginning as far as the RICO. In my opinion, they didn't meet the legal standard for RICO, and I think that's what the jury told them. And that's the purpose of a jury. A purpose of a jury is to find the truth within the evidence that is presented. And so when we look at this and we look at what his criminal history is, like I said, I don't see the aggravating factors. Initially, typically, it's going to be a minor. something egregious, something that shocks the conscience, whether it's some sort of force or there was aggression. None of that is present under the charges he was found guilty of. So it's going to be very hard for the judge to say, we're just going to keep you. Also, we have to remember that it was also based on the reason he was granted no bail was based on the idea that he was a threat to society and to the witnesses. The jury has found no witness tampering. So as right now, the judge really has to do a balancing act.
We want to remind everyone before we go ask Mike what's going on upstairs that Darla Miles has been in the courtroom, was there for the moment. We're waiting Darla to get outside, and then we'll get a fresh perspective on what actually went down and how it went down. She saw it all in the courtroom. But Mike, you're upstairs in the newsroom?
Yeah, what a fascinating front row seat she has to what just played out in court. We're hearing what just happened is court was adjourned as we wait for this 1 o'clock deadline for the attorneys to present their arguments on whether or not Sean Combs should be released. But at that point, Mr. Combs, again, Sean Diddy Combs, got down in the middle of a courtroom on his knees, appearing to pray as some of his lawyers started hugging. He has an attorney team of 6 in the courtroom, all huddling and hugging, and then that was to a massive round of applause, cheering in the gallery. Marshals then escorted Sean Combs out of the courtroom to another massive round of applause. You mentioned Darla Miles has been inside studying the jury's faces, giving great indication on what it was like to be inside. And I can only imagine, as she describes, the moments that we just talked about and what has transpired here this morning, guys.
All right, Mike, thank you so much for that, especially when you learn those details from what's happening inside the courtroom. We do want to get to Phil Tate live for us outside of the courtroom. Phil, you know, so not guilty on 3 of 5 counts, the most serious counts here, but could possibly still serve jail time. We don't know how long it'll be, maybe up to 20 years, maybe less. What does Diddy's legacy, you think, means to New York City? We're talking about a man who has received the key to the city from Harlem, grew up in Westchester, a New York guy here, and he has been found guilty, but there was so much detail, Phil, in this case that was leaked out. I mean, not leaked, but, you know, we know about. So what do you take of his legacy here in the city?
Yo, Pedro, let's just start off by saying that Sean Combs is New York City born and bred. There are several people, thousands of people who have much support behind Sean Combs. Moments ago, we actually just saw a man hold up a Sean Combs shirt. That was a very, very popular brand. We saw Sean Combs, he took over the world of fashion. We're talking about wines and spirits. We're talking about the world of entertainment. He had popular shows from Making the Band to The Four, looking for the next generation of young artists, those who were just trying to do half, if not more, of what he was able to do in his career. We even saw him take on several roles, even as an actor. Raisin in the Sun, that was another popular film that he has been in. But of course, when things come down like this, and as you all have been saying, this has definitely been a fall from grace, especially from someone who has been a staple here in New York. We also saw him get behind several educational endeavors. He had made that pledge to even Howard University that was then returned back to him. He also had that charter school up in Harlem. That was another moment of celebration for him, that he hadn't just had a celebrity, but was also using his celebrity and philanthropic efforts as well, and looking really to help those coming up behind him as well. We also saw him use his legacy, being able to help his family, even his sons, as they would want to get into the music industry and as well as the entertainment industry. But one thing that I can tell you is that outside of the courtroom, as we've been standing out here, many people have been cheering. As I shared with you moments ago, there was even that gentleman that had that Sean Combs t-shirt up, and that really was just a clear indication that this was just one of the several industries that Sean Combs had taken over. But as we know, over the past year, his life has taken a complete twist, and much of what has been built has unfortunately fallen. Guys?
Thank you. So complicated life, complicated legacy as we move forward, certainly. But as you said, New York City born and bred. We're looking at a live picture of the courthouse, waiting to see Sean Combs' family leave. So, and a lot of other people. There may be news conferences. There will be news conferences with attorneys speaking on both sides.
Yeah, we'll go right to that. I do want to ask Shauna really quickly, because he was talking about the legacy of Sean Combs. And when we were on here yesterday on set talking, we spoke about this. His defense decided not to call him up to the stand, did not call for witnesses, and they said this is not a guy, who's an angel. He has his issues, but what he did was not a crime.
Correct, because just having bad character or having bad habits or an alternate sexual lifestyle is not a crime, and that is what the jury came back and determined that is not criminal, and what he was doing under those charges was not criminal. And so I think, is anything going to be the same? No, but people will know now that those things are not criminal, and it is what it is.
So he's already been detained for 9 months. Could that be time served?
That is going to be counted as time served. Absolutely.
Okay. We have Mike Marza in the newsroom right now. You have a statement from, I believe it's Cassie Ventura's representation.
And Pedro, when you think about it, this all got started because of Cassie Ventura filing that lawsuit against Sean Combs that triggered the avalanche of accusations. And the attorney for Ms. Ventura just issued a statement, and I'll read just a little bit. She echoes that, saying this entire criminal process started when our client, Cassie Ventura, had the courage to file her civil complaint in November of 2023. This case proved that change is long overdue, and we will continue to fight on behalf of survivors. To paraphrase the statement just issued by the attorney for Cassie Ventura, and when you think about the civil side of this, Cassie Ventura was paid a settlement of $20 million, $10 million from that Intercontinental Hotel in that horrific beating that was captured on video in 2016 that became an integral part of this case and was talked about a lot, played a lot in the court. And it was Cassie Ventura, prosecutors alleging, escaping one of these freak-off sessions, and it was the violence that they pointed to. And now you have Cassie Ventura echoing the statements that we heard so often in the Me Too movement. And Shauna, you and I were talking about this on a different program yesterday, and it was interesting as this court was playing out, as the trial was playing out, that Cassie Ventura and Jane and another woman named Mia all had their own attorneys, just giving you an indication of just how complex and layered all of these accusations were. But that $20 million settlement did become part of the testimony, and defense attorneys argued to have a portion of that reread to the jury, ultimately failed in that attempt. But this is a huge part of this, because none of this likely would have happened had it not been for Cassie Ventura's civil suit, right?
Absolutely. This got started, and the federal prosecutors determined the charge after that lawsuit came out. This is what it was based on. Yeah. And so the civil standard is not as high as the criminal standard. And that's what we have to remember, is that it's only a preponderance when you talk about the civil burden of proof. But when you talk about life and liberty, it is beyond a reasonable doubt. And so that's the difference we have here.
The most famous case you go back to, I think of, is O.J. Simpson.
Absolutely.
Exactly right.
Absolutely.
That's the biggest case you think?
Yes.
So, and there is a lot more court time in this. Like today, we're not going to say this is done and we're finished, because we may make that sentencing by 1 o'clock this afternoon, but there's likely,
or at least if it can be released.
Right.
Right.
There may be an appeal to this decision.
Correct.
Right. And
Absolutely.
then we have those additional lawsuits, the civil lawsuits to come. So even though this may kind of, we may have a decision on these counts, this isn't the end of the court drama.
No, it is not. It's not the end of the court drama, but what this is the closing of the trial. And the verdict, and once we have that, is really the end of the trial and what's going to happen. From here on out, we're looking at consequences. We're looking at the sentencing, and we're looking at all these additional civil suits that have been filed.
Got it. And we are standing by waiting for Darla Miles, who just exited the courthouse, and we'll get to her in just a second.
Pedro, one more thing I should just mention in the context of everything that we're watching unfold today. If you remember, if you've been in New York for quite some time, you remember Sean Diddy Combs faced a shooting charge, a gun charge, and it was a trial that happened back in 2001 for a 1999 club shooting that injured 3 people.
Right.
He was ultimately acquitted in 2001, but it was a high-profile case, and so you have him more than 20 years later back in a courtroom, hearing what happened, acquitted on some of these charges, but convicted on 2.
Yeah, we all remember that that court case from what, 2001, I believe it was, around there. Shauna, so when you hear the 20 years, up to 20 years in prison, we're standing by and we're looking at that number. It sounds like a big number, but I want to reiterate, even with that past that Sean Combs had, being in courtrooms before, that does not play a factor in the decision making of today?
No, because he has to have a criminal history that are convictions. If I remember correctly, that was an acquittal.
Right.
It's not
Exactly
just
right.
charges.
Yep.
So if he has not been convicted of any other crimes, he has no violent history under the law as charged, and he also does not have any aggravating factors that the judge can find, then this is going to go towards the lower end. I mean, I don't expect to see more than 3 to 5 years under either given charge, to be very honest, because that's not what this charge or his background calls for.
So let's get to Dollar Miles right now. She just exited the courtroom. You've been in there all morning long. You watched everything play out over the past couple of months. Tell us, what was that moment like when that verdict was given out?
A lot to unpack here, Pedro. First of all, when we found out there was a verdict, obviously there's that 20-minute window where there's lots of tension. So you saw all of the attorneys file in. Every single attorney for Sean Combs could not sit down. They were standing in the well with their arms folded. Mark Agnifilo was pacing back and forth. The family returned to the courtroom. Sean Combs returned to the courtroom. He said a few words to his family saying it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. Now, this is after he led a moment of prayer earlier this morning when they were in court. So now the jury is seated in the courtroom. Sean Combs, and actually, let me just go back, because when we were waiting for the verdict to come in, Sean Combs was sitting in his chair reading Psalms 18. It was a printout of Psalms 18. So again, he had that moment of quiet, that moment of meditation. He was still waiting to find out. Obviously, there were four verdicts reached yesterday and then the other one this morning. So the jury is seated. They say they have found a verdict. And so as they were reading down the counts, again, Sean Combs was not looking forward. He was kind of in that state, that stillness, that meditative state that we've seen him. And the first count, not guilty, he goes, yeah, that was the first thing. You could hear a little bit of cheering from the family and the crowd. People were saying yes. The second count, he just kind of fist pumped. Now, when the third count, the sex trafficking, the Mann Act, the interstate prostitution, when that guilty verdict was read, he was kind of holding his head like this. And you could see he was shocked. He did not see that one coming. You could see kind of like that kinetic shock run through his body. But then when they went through the next count, the sex trafficking for Jane, not guilty. Then the prostitution for Jane, he and Tinny Garagos, they kind of had like a moment. They were sitting next to each other. They grabbed hands. They were holding hands, kind of like, like this, pumping each other's fists, like congratulations. All of the attorneys, all of his defense attorneys who were pacing around, nervous before the verdict was read. You could see smiles on the face of Brian Steele, smiles on the face of Mark Agnifilo. Then Combs began to turn around and speak to his family and saying, I'm coming home, it's going to be okay. And then he actually started thanking the jury. He started nodding his head, thanking the jury, that same eye contact that we'd seen at the beginning of the trial that he'd been admonished for. He did that again. Now, but it's not clear if any of the jurors looked back and acknowledged him. I didn't really see anyone look back to acknowledge him thanking the jury, but he was just thanking the jury. And he would continuously look back at his family. At one point, his son Justin, when the jury left the room, he stood up, he grabbed a book in his hand, he held the hand up like, thank you. Lots of prayers from the Combs family. Now, here's the issue. This is, again, of course, not over, because his attorney, Mark Agnifilo, is asking that he be released on bail in light of being acquitted of the most serious charges. So then again, you see the attorneys going tit for tat. Mark Agnifilo says in light of these charges, he's been acquitted. He deserves to be returned home to his family. He deserves to go back to Two-Star Island in Florida. That's when Maureen Comey stood up and said, listen, Your Honor, these are still serious counts. He was acquitted. However, you heard extensive testimony about the threats. You heard extensive testimony about the violence, and those are still underlying factors. Now, this is when you saw Tinny Garagos was livid at this argument, especially in light of the verdict that had just been read. She leaned over to Mark Agnifilo, and she was just like fierce in her face, she was mad, pointing at Maureen Comey, speaking to Mark Agnifilo, just really upset that it appeared that the prosecution was still going hard to keep Sean Combs detained. Now, when the jury left and we were all dismissed from the court, that was another powerful moment. Sean Combs dropped to his knees. He dropped to his knees where his chair is and just bowed his head and just prayed. It was about 2 or 3 minutes. He just dropped, and you could just tell he was relieved, he was thankful. You just can't really emphasize it enough. Now, typically, this is not what marshals will allow a person to do after conviction. His family stood up in that moment, kind of acknowledging that he was on his knees with his head bowed. And this, now, remind you, it's also an armchair, so it's a pretty robust chair, and he's just on his knees, praying in the chair. When he stood up, the family cheered, lots of cheers. It was kind of like the end of the Super Bowl for this family and for this legal team. They were cheering. Tinny Garagos, Mark Agnifilo, group hugs.
His family right now is coming out of the courtroom behind you. We've just seen his mother leading.
Janice Combs walking out the door.
Leading the group out, but we also saw Christian Combs, Justin Combs, as well as his daughters leaving the courtroom.
His
right
6
there
children coming out. You have to wonder, this is a very different picture of Sean Combs than we have seen, certainly for the last 2 months, played out in court. Darla, I wanted to ask you, Darla, do you see contrition in Sean Combs today, since you're talking about so much faith and holding up a Bible? Relief? And was it relief? What do you see a changed man? I mean, I know it's your opinion, but this is certainly a different Sean Combs than was portrayed in court day after day.
First of all, let me tell you, I was actually just in the elevator and in the hallway with the family, the children, as they left. And obviously, we've been in trial together. And as they were walking out of court, you could see them really happy about the verdict as they were waiting for the vehicle. So I was just in there with them before we came out. And the family, obviously, very pleased. Sean Combs has maintained he was innocent the entire time, so I don't believe contrition is the word, but you definitely see humility. You see a man of faith. You see his family, the level of family support. There's definitely a tale of two Sean Combs, but I don't think that's new, right? I think at the beginning of the trial, they said this is a man who's dynamic. He inspires people. He's a music mogul. He's touched every life of the people who have worked for him. But there is also a second side of Sean Combs that you don't know, and that was literally in the prosecution's opening arguments. So to say that, I wouldn't speak on contrition. I don't think that's the word, but you see a man who has been praying, and you see a man who feels like his prayers have been answered.
Job of painting every second, from when the jury walked in the room to when those charges were read to when they're discussing about possibly releasing Sean Combs from jail today. So you were at the point right there where the lawyers were at each other, kind of looking at each other in that argument. Did you feel like one side had a stronger argument standing there?
Again, not a legal analyst, but Judge Arun Subramanian asked Mark Agnifilo, what does that look like? Does he walk out of court today? And he said, in the world, according to Mark Agnifilo, actually, yes. And we would, obviously there's some paperwork that needs to be filed. We need to go through some legal proceedings, but absolutely, yes, this is a day where we think he should walk out of this courtroom. And so then Judge Subramanian asked Combs, I can imagine, Mr. Combs, you don't want to go back to MDC. And he started shaking his head no like that. And he's been known to kind of communicate with the judge like that. There was a little bit of laughter in the courtroom when he was just like, no way, I don't want to go back into the courtroom. I also want to share this with you. I was in the elevator with Mark Agnifilo after the legal wrangling back and forth, because what is now going to happen, both sides have to submit a letter to the court why they believe he deserves to be released on bail today, why they believe he should still be held in custody. Mark Agnifilo is asking for a $1 million bond with 3 family members who are in court today. So they have resolved to get it done today. So court is still not dismissed. We still have to return to the court at 1 o'clock this afternoon to determine or to learn whether or not this bail application will be approved or not. And if he does, in fact, walk out of the front doors today. But I was in the elevator with Mark Agnifilo. He was asked by one reporter, how do you feel? He says, I've never had this feeling in 34 years. And so then I asked him, well, what does that feeling feel like? And he kind of thought about it, and he says, I'm relieved that I'm not miserable. And so that was one perspective from Mark Agnifilo. The other part of that is Doug Wigdor. He's seated directly in front of me in the courthouse. He's been here every single day of the deliberations. He is the attorney for Cassie Ventura. He's the one who filed that November 2023 bombshell lawsuit that really spurred this investigative, this federal investigation into action. And as they read the verdict, he just sat on his phone with his head down. He didn't flinch. He didn't look. This is obviously not the verdict, not guilty on sex trafficking for his client, Cassie Ventura. Speaking to him privately over the last few days in jury deliberations, he was disappointed, and some of the arguments he heard come from the defense during closing arguments. He said, you know, Cassie liked to have sex. That's interesting. A modern-day love story. That's interesting. So I was really disturbed by some of the closing arguments that Mark Agnifilo gave on behalf of Sean Combs, which ultimately ended up being convincing for this jury that acquitted him on the 2 sex trafficking charges, the one for Cassie Ventura and the one for Jane.
Inside, thank you to Darla Miles that she was inside court throughout this 8-week process. If you're just now joining us here on Eyewitness News alongside Sandra Bookman, I'm Mike Marza. In what a bombshell day, finally the conclusion of this Sean Diddy Combs trial that had 28 days of testimony and more than 20 witnesses from the prosecution. And Sean Combs convicted on 2 counts, Sandra, but acquitted on 3.
Yeah, and the 2 counts, he was convicted on the lesser charges. Am I correct in characterizing that the lesser of
Yes,
the 5 charges?
Let's bring in ABC News legal contributor Shauna Lloyd, who has been here throughout this process. Take us through exactly what this means and what this verdict means moving forward for Sean Combs.
So right now, we know that he is not guilty of the 3 largest charges, which carry life sentences. One is the RICO charge, one is trafficking for Cassie Ventura, and trafficking for... Now, he has been acquitted, so they are off the table. Those each carried a life sentence. So now we have the remaining 2 charges. That is the transportation for prostitution related to Cassie Ventura and transportation for prostitution related to Jane. Those each carried up to 10 years potential. They are 2 different victims, so the judge has the option of making these terms consecutive, which means they'd be served back to back. Now, we do know that the judge has to balance. When we look at sentencing, they look at other things. Is this defendant, do they have a history of violent convictions? Were there extenuating, aggravating circumstances? Were there minors involved? There are other aggravating factors that I expect that the prosecution is going to argue because they're already indicated they're looking for the maximum penalty. The defense is going to say he has no major criminal history. He was acquitted on his last charge. He is not a flight risk. He has extensive ties to the community. Therefore, he should be on the lower end of those spectrums.
Will they consider it things like that video that was shown of Cassie Ventura being beaten in a hallway? Are those things likely to be considered when this sentencing goes forward?
I believe that the prosecution is going to put those forth and ask the judge to say, even though he was acquitted, we know that this is who he is. I expect that the defense is going to argue, Judge, this was over 10 years ago. This is not who my defendant is. He expressed remorse. He's gone through counseling. That is in the past. And so I expect that those are the arguments they're going to make as to why it should be towards the lower or towards the higher end of the spectrum.
Here is the video that started it all. It was captured inside of an Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles in 2016, and prosecutors said that is Cassie Ventura being beaten after she escaped or left a sexual encounter dubbed a freak-off. What we're waiting on now is a deadline that is going to come in about 2 hours for both sides, the prosecution and the defense attorneys, to argue whether or not Sean Combs should be released today. Defense attorneys saying that he could be released on $1 million guaranteed bond. We'll see how that plays out. But Shauna, if you're just now joining us, you get the alert on your phone from Eyewitness News and you say, okay, there's a verdict. Take us through what the prosecution was hoping to prove and where they succeeded and where they failed.
So the prosecution was hoping to prove, let's start with RICO, that one, there was a criminal enterprise that was used to further his needs, which they were terming his sexual desires, and that they took and made predicate criminal acts in furtherance of this conspiracy. Those are those arson, kidnapping, bribery, all those charges that we saw. So that's the RICO charge. The trafficking is that related to Jane or to Cassie, that by force, fraud, or coercion, he moved them from state to state in order to partake in commercial sex acts. They did not prove either of those charges, neither the trafficking related to Cassie nor Jane, nor did they prove the RICO. The last charge is a transportation for prostitution. That is basically moving someone through interstate commerce, which is from state to state, in order for them to engage in criminal prostitution. And this was proven. Now, the reason this was proven was because that was the strongest evidence they had. They could show that these were clearly escorts, they were going there for the purposes of commercial sex acts, and that they were paid for these sex acts. They showed bank records, flight records, all of which was paid through Sean Combs.
And even going into this trial, and we talked about this a few weeks ago, me who knows nothing legally, but I thought that RICO charge is hard to prove. So why would the prosecution even go there?
You know, it's always an interesting thing. The prosecution and the federal prosecutors get to make their charging instructions as they see fit. They saw this as a criminal enterprise. When I looked at this from the beginning, as you know, I shared with both of you, I don't see RICO. And the reason I don't see RICO is because the individuals that you're alleging are the enterprise are his bodyguards and his personal assistants and his chief of staff, who is Christina Coram. Your personal assistants are paid to do and bring the things that you ask for. So the idea that they consented to be a part of a criminal conspiracy because they brought baby oil and Astroglide to a hotel, I don't see that. That doesn't meet the legal standard. And I think that's what the jury saw. A bodyguard, they're paid for your protection. So the idea that they were complicit in your crimes because they were standing outside of a room or standing near you, that to me does not hold legally. And I think that's what the jury saw as well.
That's the argument the defense tried to make too, is that if this is an enterprise, only one person is charged.
Correct. That is another thing.
We are going to throw it back out to Kimberly Richardson, who has been one of the reporters following this trial from the very beginning. This all happened so much faster today, Kimberly, than I thought most people expected.
And Sandra, not only did today happen fast, but just in general, the deliberations started Monday late morning at about 11:30. So we were only, 2 days in with this amount of charges and the seriousness of the charge. It was surprising that they even came back yesterday with that note 6 at the end of the day saying they had reached a verdict on counts 2 through 5. Let's back up and see how we got here, how we got to this point. This all started in November of 2023 when Cassie Ventura, Combs' ex-girlfriend, filed that civil lawsuit. She was alleging that she was trapped in a cycle of violence. Well, the very next day, November 17th, Combs settled that. We learned during the second day of testimony, Cassie said that it was settled for $20 million. Fast forward to March of 2024. Those were when we had those early morning raids at Combs' estates in Los Angeles and Miami. That was, coverage was wall to wall. We saw the feds going into these mansions, and